The story begins with a young man approaching a girl named Kara. He asks her if she needs anything. The girl immediately asked him if he would do what she asked of him. He told her that all she had to do was ask, and he would do it. She immediately assumed that he agreed so easily because he knew what she wanted to ask him. Soon she began to come closer, and the guy was very surprised by this, and therefore asked her to wait. At that moment, she grabbed the wall and thought, someone once said that there is nothing more senseless in the world than constantly stepping on the same rake. At that very moment, Kara looked into her friend's eyes and said that she didn't need love. After straightening a strand of his hair, she asked him to promise that he would never betray her. Afterwards, she touched his chin and added that, in exchange, she would be his perfect bride. She assured herself that this time everything would be different. She told Palon that she would make him the next emperor, which would mean everything would return to normal in this kingdom. So the day of the emperor's coronation arrives. Our heroine will never forget this day. The man turned to Kyra and said that everything would be fine now. After all, it was the very day her beloved Riken became emperor. This is the very day when she thought that she would become his empress, and therefore was in anticipation. Nevertheless, the girl coughed, thinking that the poison was spreading through her body faster and faster. Somehow she assured herself that for the sake of Riken and today, she could endure everything. All she has to do is wait for the moment when her lover calls her name, and everything will immediately change. Just as our heroine began to collapse from exhaustion, fortunately for her, Vienna caught her. The girl immediately thanked her. So soon the announcers began to say that the great emperor would soon announce the name of the future empress. Our heroine was incredibly excited. Finally, she would become empress, but soon the emperor called not Kara, but Vienna de Orsha. Our heroine didn't understand what was happening and assumed it was some kind of mistake. Looking at Rokan, she convinced herself until the very end that he had simply gotten confused. However, after some time, Vienna took the crown. Our heroine could not understand why this happened, why her lover treated her like that. Soon, she noticed Vienna's intense mocking gaze. She suddenly asked her sister if she was happy for her. Kyra was speechless from all this and couldn't respond. Will Vienna really become empress? Soon the emperor and empress met eyes, and the public began to praise the new chosen ones. Kyra wasn't about to give in and let things slide. She had something to say. She'd done so much for Riken. She'd insisted she was empress right up until the very end. At that moment, Riken turned to Kara and asked in surprise if she really thought she'd become empress after everything she'd done. Why was she silent? Soon Vienna also opened her mouth and told His Majesty that he was good-natured. But now, despite this uncomprehending ugly face of Kara, he can throw her away like trash. Our heroine was immediately overcome with anger. Was she trash? She immediately began wondering who had helped Riken ascend to the throne. At this point, the emperor said that he did not want to get his hands dirty, so he asked his precious empress to sort out this misunderstanding. After these words, our heroine began coughing again. The poison hadn't disappeared from her body after all. Seeing this, Vienna turned to Kyra de Orsha and told her she'd been deceived. Riken had never had any feelings for her from the start. She said that she was truly disgusting and had always hated her sister with all her heart, so she immediately came up with a plan. She used it, let it do all the dirty work, and climbed to the highest place, just like now. Then, with the same mockery, Vienna asked her sister if she knew who else hated her the most. Looking into those bewildered, grief-stricken eyes, the girl said that their new emperor hated her. However, our heroine didn't understand why. After all, she had given her life to make Riken emperor. Soon she began to lose a lot of blood. Vienna spoke in horror about how much blood there was. It was disgusting. She couldn't understand how the palace could be desecrated on such a happy day. Soon after, she waved her hand and said goodbye to Kyra. The girl remained under the care of 2 knights. Our heroine wanted to say something else, but at that moment, Vienna only asked her servants to throw Kyra out of the palace and as far away as possible. After a while, the action takes us to the forest, where apparently Kyra was sent. Looking around, our heroine immediately realized that this was Filippo Hill, where she and Riken played as children. Having fallen to the ground, the girl decided that she really was a complete fool since she had let things get to this point. She became addicted to poisons and gave her life for this freak, but she just wanted to be near him. One way or another, she now understood that this was the end. She had literally lost everything. The girl looked at the vial of liquid. She soon decided that it was best to end her suffering herself, and so decided to drink poison that would quickly kill her. A moment later, she lowered her head and looked up at the sky. Now all that lay before her was eternal rest. But only one voice began to ring in her head. Someone who hadn't forgotten her was running through the forest trying to find Kara. As it turned out, it was Palon who, with great difficulty, finally found the girl, but too late. He grabbed her in his arms and began begging her to wake up. Looking at Palon, the girl realized that this was her ex-fiancé who was supposed to become emperor. Unfortunately, despite their promises, she was never close to him and gave her heart to Raikon. It was funny to see him at the last moment of his life. The saddest thing was that Palon kept calling out to Kara and cried for her that day. He begged her not to go and leave him alone. Looking at his face filled with tears, the girl realized that he was really in love with her. Tears began to well up in her eyes, just as blood began to well up in her mouth. She had made a huge mistake. However, already at the last moment of her life, she glanced at Palon and began to think about Freaks Rakan in Vienna. The girl swore to herself that if she had the chance, she would never forgive these hypocrites. She would curse them even in the next world. But one way or another, Kyra was absolutely sure that she had to take revenge on them. Soon the heroine's eyes closed, and it seemed that this was the end. But after a while, for us, she jumped up with a scream. Realizing she was still alive, the girl simply said how fed up she was with everything. She wanted to leave this life. After examining herself and noticing the bandage on her head, the girl decided that Palon had managed to save her after all. But still, she thought that it would be better to let her die, since she would not be able to live after what Vienna and Rakan did to her. At that very moment, our heroine groaned a little from the pain in her head, and a girl immediately ran into the room, asking the lady what had happened. Seeing that everything was fine, and she had woken up, the girl was very happy. However, our heroine didn't understand what was happening. Jane walked up to Kara and took her hand, and our heroine tried to understand why she had short hair. Remembering literally what happened a few days ago, our heroine immediately remembered that Jane had long hair. One way or another, in addition to all this, she also noticed that the girl looked quite young. At that moment, Kyra's heart began to beat incredibly fast. How did this happen? A thought immediately occurred to her. She realized that she did not feel any pain after taking the poison, and she also felt that her hair had grown back. Jane suddenly turned to the lady and asked if she recognized her. Was she really that dizzy? Our heroine, however, ignored the questions and asked her friend what was going on here. Soon she looked around again, and to her surprise, noticed that it was an old-fashioned room. Kyra immediately remembered from this that when Jane had this hairstyle, she was 18 years old. She realized with horror that she had most likely returned to the past. At that very moment, someone knocked on the door, so the girl's gazes turned there. Rakan was peeking out from behind the door, and at first glance, he seemed very happy to see Kara. Our heroine, for obvious reasons, was immediately enveloped in darkness, and the girl fell into a stupor. The guy asked the girl in surprise if she was okay, and then saying that she was a poor thing, reached for her forehead, asking how she managed to get hurt like that. But as soon as he touched her, our heroine felt an enormous hatred towards her, emanating from his touch. The girl slapped Rakan's hand. The boy immediately asked, Kara surprised what had happened to her. Our heroine, looking at him, said she didn't need his pathetic consolations. She promised herself that now everything would change. The guy still didn't understand what was happening, and at that moment, Kara turned to Jane and asked her to escort the prince out of her room. Rakan, perplexed, once again asked the girl what had happened to her, just in case he decided to remind her that it was him, Rakan. However, Jane could not go against her mistress's words, so she immediately approached His Highness and said that she would take him there. Finally, he decided to look at Kara, but he saw nothing but hatred in her eyes. With a heavy sigh, the guy turned sharply and headed for the exit as he was told. After some time, our heroine went out into the street, thinking that she really had been given the opportunity for a second life. Looking at the sky, she began to think about how to get revenge on her sister and Rakan. After all, she wouldn't give in to emotions now. In any case, she was thinking about what she should do first, when suddenly something distracted her. Turning back, she noticed the swing and was glad that it was still there. This is an old wooden swing and a new one that was right next to it, and Vienna used this as an excuse for its betrayal. Ridiculous. The action shifts to the past. Vienna was talking to her sister and saying that for her coming of age, she wanted a swing set as a gift. However, our heroine rudely said that this was impossible and she would not receive them. She explained this by saying that this was the only thing that reminded her of her mother. After these words, our heroine apologized and turned around, thereby leaving Vienna. The girl was very upset about this, but she certainly wasn't going to give up. After just a couple of days, Vienna was showing her sister the new swing their father had made at her request. Now they can swing on it together. Our heroine even flinched slightly at these words. It was quite unexpected. Soon Vienna asked her sister to give her a push, which Kara couldn't refuse, so she agreed. The girl started to roll her, but Vienna told her not to be afraid and to roll her harder. Our heroine listened to her and did as her sister asked, but after a couple of minutes, something broke and Vienna fell to the ground. Kyra was calling out to her sister in confusion and asking if she was okay, when suddenly the next surprise came straight to her mind. As a result, Vienna fell and lost consciousness, and she in turn received a blow to the head. After this, everyone would think of her as an older sister who envied her younger sister. She even wondered if she had returned at this very time. At that moment, two people's voices were heard behind the tree. Someone was asking the girl if she had really fallen off the swing. Vienna, with tears in her eyes, said that it was true and that she was very ashamed. Either way, she couldn't understand why her sister had pushed her so hard. Hearing her sister's words, our heroine was surprised that the two were already close at such a time. Meanwhile, Vienna looked at Rakan and said that he was probably surprised, but she also didn't know that her sister was so cruel. The guy asked again in surprise, and the girl nodded her head and said that she didn't even expect such an act from her sister. One way or another, she suggested leaving talk about her sister and talking about something else. Our heroine, hearing all this, was only surprised that she had suspected nothing all this time. Fool, that's all Kyra ever called herself. At this point, Rakan told Vienna that Kyra seemed to have not yet recovered from the blow and was acting strangely. Her sister immediately assumed it was because she was ashamed of what she had done to her. In any case, she assured the prince that he had nothing to worry about. Her sister, despite her nasty nature, was very grateful for his attention. Rakan smiled, looking at her, and said that he was grateful to her for the kind words. He addressed her as Miss Vienna Trahan, and then asked if he could call her Vienna de Orshi. She smiled and said she would be delighted. At that moment, he took her hand and reminded her that she would soon be an adult, so he saw nothing wrong with calling her that. He also said he thought Kara wouldn't be too opposed to it either. Our heroine, meanwhile, was incredibly angry. She immediately remembered how the girl had told her that she had a fiancé, but he was still trying to get closer to her. There was no need to even think about falling in love with him. Apparently, for Vienna, who was trying to improve her social status, Rokan was the best opportunity, and joining the Orshi family was the first step towards this. Of course, her father held some position at court and even received the status of a marquise. However, only she, the only heir trusted by the imperial crown, could make decisions about who could enter the de Orsh family. And now, using all her influence, she will not allow such vile vipers to penetrate the sacred family. Suddenly, that autumn rainy season arrived. Vienna was about to come of age. After a while, the action shifts back to the palace. Our heroine thanks the second prince for coming. Pelon told the girl he'd heard about the misfortune that had befallen her. He was curious about how she was feeling. He also apologized for only arriving now. This is our heroine's fiancé, and first in line to the throne. He is the son of the previous empress, the second prince of Pelon. Our heroine knew for sure that she needed him to protect herself and her family. But just then, rumors began to circulate that her engagement to Pelon would be called off. The funniest thing was that the prince, having heard about this, did not even bother to see her and discuss everything in person. He thought her closeness to Rakan had prompted her to break off the engagement. However, her goal now is to change their relationship. She needs to stop all the rumors and make Pelon emperor. It was at this moment that our heroine decided to bring up the rumors about their breakup. Looking at the second prince, she said she didn't want that. The boy, surprised, said he agreed with her and was sure his father didn't want to break up either. In that case, he promised that he would try to stop all these stupid rumors. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and noticed that he was good-natured. Why hadn't she noticed this? At that moment, she thanked him for his words, as they had calmed her down. Suddenly, Pelon pulled out something. The boy handed it to the girl and said it was holy water for her wounds. Kara, perplexed, asked if she could really use it. After all, it was only for members of the royal family. Taking his bride's hand, Pelon nodded and added that if she needed more, all she had to do was ask he would spare nothing for her. The girl smiled and thanked the groom, saying that she would gladly take advantage of this. The girl also began shyly clutching the bottle and telling His Highness that she had a request. She said that her father and Raycon wanted her to take Vienna. The young man decided it was rather odd to accept her into the family, considering she was an heiress. Besides, rumor had it that the Marquis loved Vienna even more than her. He said bluntly that this wasn't the best decision. Our heroine suddenly said that unfortunately, she only had the right to refuse, and all other power in the family belonged to her father. After these words, the guy realized she wanted him to help her. Kara, looking at him, asked him to promise that he would never betray her. In turn, she promised to become his ideal bride and make him the next emperor. He suddenly said he had another condition. Kara asked him to tell her about it because they were supposed to help each other. She would do whatever he wanted. The second prince asked her to accept whatever he gave and did for her. That was his condition. Our heroine, of course, was a bit confused about this strange condition, accepting everything he would do for her. Anyway, at that moment, her thoughts were interrupted by Raycon entering the room. Our heroine was surprised that he arrived so quickly and asked him to sit down. The guy said he'd been really bored, so he came running to her. He immediately touched her head and asked how she was feeling. After all, she had been feeling unwell yesterday. Either way, Kyra ignored these words and started talking about her own things. She approached Raycon and said she had a favor to ask. She mentioned Vienna's coming-of-age day and asked him to accompany her. The guy was quite shocked by this proposal, so he asked why him. The girl explained that coming of age only happens once in a lifetime, and if you spend it alone, what's the point? Besides, Vienna itself is looking forward to it. Looking at Raycon's shocked face, our heroine asked if this was too unexpected a request. In any case, she touched his hand and said that there was still time so he could think about it. At that moment, she decided to mention the rumors that her engagement to Pelon would be called off. Had Raycon heard about this? Without even giving him a chance to say anything, the girl asked him in surprise if this really happened, would he be able to take her away? The boy immediately said, surprised that he now understood why the atmosphere in the palace was so gloomy. Now everything was clear. Kyra smiled as she looked at him, but she knew to herself that with this reaction, he was most likely avoiding an awkward question. Unexpectedly, he took her hand and asked if she would agree to such a thing. In the past, when she realized how she felt about Raycon, she immediately wanted to break off the engagement, but the prince stopped her. He assured her that she could not leave Pelon because if he took another noblewoman as his wife and his position became stronger, he would not have a single chance. Only Pelon stood in Raycon's way to the throne. The guy was an actor, so he even shouted that he hated the thought of Kara being betrothed to another. But still, she must be patient until he can strengthen his powers. Our heroine said in surprise that she loved him and did not want to deceive Pelon. Kyra continued to say that she really wanted to break off the engagement, but Rakan shut her up with his hugs. He started talking again, with a smile on his face, that this was all for the sake of their bright future. She could be patient for a little while. Thus, due to her blind love for Raycon, she was forced to continue playing the role of bride. Both Kyra and Raycon exchanged words about their love for each other. The action takes us back to Raycon and Kyra's room. The girl, surprised, responded to Raycon's question by saying that he already knew the answer. Still, the guy couldn't understand what the girl was talking about. Kara thought that she hadn't wanted it at all back then, but now everything was different, and from the heart. Taking the cup in her hands, she said that she did not want to break off her engagement with Pelon. The coming-of-age ceremony is an important ritual that announces the possibility of marriage. It occurs at 16 for women and 18 for men. That is why Vienna was waiting with trepidation for this desired day. The action shifts forward a bit. Jane, looking out the window, imagined that Miss Vienna was eagerly awaiting her celebration. Our heroine looked out the window and told her assistant that she was also really looking forward to it. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Someone immediately greeted Mr. Melvin. Soon, the second prince's servant, Melvin O'Hara, entered the room. He greeted the Marquise, Kyra d'Orsay. The girl smiled and assumed the prince had sent him. Melvin, with a smile on his face, said he had brought what she had asked for. Kyra said she would accept it with gratitude, and so Melvin gave the order to bring it in. Looking at the whole pile of gifts, our heroine said that there were far more of them than there should be. Melvin quoted the prince's words, "There's a big event at the Marquis estate, so we need to send everything we can." Our heroine was very grateful to Pelon, so she asked him to convey her thanks. Soon after, someone approached her with a letter and said that the prince had asked that this be given to Kara separately. The girl opened the letter and asked if she should reply. Melvin smiled and said that if she replied, the prince would be so happy that he would give him a golden mansion. The guy said he was very happy that Kara was now on his side. He said he couldn't visit her in person, so he sent her gifts, but that was non-committal. Kyra smiled after reading this letter. How could he write such sweet words? In any case, the girl called Jane and asked for a pen. As soon as she took it in her hands, she asked Melvin to wait a little, to which the guy replied that he was ready to wait as long as necessary. The girl wrote that she was doubly grateful. Now she'll be the most charming girl in the world, and try not to be sad in Pelon's absence. At that moment, our heroine became thoughtful. She remembered that Rokan would also be at the ceremony. She understood that if they were seen together, rumors of a broken engagement would spread even more. Her reputation would plummet, and her father would increasingly compare her to Vienna. She needs to be around Pelon as often as possible, so she asked Melvin to wait a little longer, because she forgot to write something. A short time later, she handed him the letter and thanked him for waiting. Melvin smiled and said they'd see each other again in 3 days. Left alone in the room, our heroine looked back and was surprised to admit that there really were a lot of gifts. Either way, she still clearly remembered what Pelon had told her back then. He had come to her while she was suffering from a seizure and said he hoped she would feel better. He brought her 8 vials of holy water. If only she had known he'd been specifically soliciting holy water for her from other members of the royal family after losing his right to the throne. After he told her that she was more important to him than the crown, she realized that she should not have taken that water. His words hurt her even more. To quote, they were, "I have lost nothing, and this is what should have been from the very beginning." For him, she was much more precious. At that moment, our heroine was pulled out of her thoughts by the words of Jane, who turned to the lady in surprise and asked to look at the beautiful dress. In the past, she had worn this dress when her engagement with Pelon was about to break off. It was precisely this dress that the emperor ordered the 4 princesses to wear to match the empresses. And now it was already in her hands. She hoped that she would finally be able to stop these stupid rumors. Who would dare think about breaking up if they dressed the same? Looking at the bottle of holy water, she decided that she needed to put herself and her health in order. She understood that the atmosphere in the mansion had changed her father's discrimination against Vienna, and so on. After putting the water in the box, she decided the wounds weren't worth it. Other remedies would do. She thought that this medicine was created for something more, and that it could definitely be useful in the future. Evening came. The room was filled with even more gifts, so the logical question arose, where did they all come from? Jane told our heroine that all these gifts were sent by the 5th Prince Raukan. Kyra assumed he'd heard Pelon had sent her a gift and was in a hurry too. Oh my, how childish. On the right was a Raken dress, and on the left was a Pelon dress. She didn't want to break off her engagement to Pelon, but she couldn't decide if she wanted to get closer to him. At that moment, Jane remembered and told the lady that Prince Raken had also sent her a letter. In the letter, he said he didn't want to accompany Vienna, but he would ask her to dance. He thought that would be enough for her, so there was no need to ask for more. As expected of our heroine, it was a refusal, and yet something amused her. She wondered which of them he was referring to here as Lady de Orche. But in the end, she got to the point where she said that this dress should be suitable for Kira, which was the reason why he wrote this letter in the first place. Jane suddenly said that Prince Pelon had sent a dress that matched her appearance, and the 5th prince had sent a dress that reminded her of His Highness. She was curious about which dress she would choose, and our heroine immediately replied that she was choosing the Pelon dress. She was sure Raken would choose a suit similar to this dress, so what should she do with it? At that moment, she turned to Jane and asked her to send a seamstress and shoemakers. She came up with an idea for what to do with the Raken dress. 3 days later, she attended Vienna's coming-of-age ceremony. Coming out of the bathroom, our heroine decided it was time for revenge. As soon as she entered the room where the dresses were, she asked in surprise what this blue dress was doing there, because she said that she would wear a red one. She glanced at the terrified maids and realized Rakan had influenced them. Oddly enough, he would never have done anything like this in the past. Anyway, our heroine fixed her hair and told one of the maids that they could begin preparations. The girls immediately caught on and nodded. Our heroine also asked them to make sure that her wounds were not visible. She knew that if this had been a coming-of-age ceremony in the past, everything would have gone too smoothly, but not today. After a while, Kyra was collected and told herself that she needed to concentrate because it was almost time to start. Meanwhile, Vienna was happy that she would finally become a real Diorche and would not be the pathetic Vienna Trahan, but the Grand Duchess of the Orsch family. Our heroine, looking at her sister, saw how Vienna was about to burst from anticipation. The girl bowed and asked to be allowed to introduce herself. Shikara de Orche would be hosting today's ceremony. The entire audience was excited that the ceremony was about to begin, so they started clapping their hands. A moment later, both girls' heirs of the Duorsch family were descending the stairs, but at this point, our heroine allowed us to introduce today's heroine, Baroness Vienna Trahan. Vienna immediately looked at her sister in bewilderment, and her father, perplexed, asked Kara what she was doing. Vienna started shaking in bewilderment and simply couldn't understand why Kyra said Trahan and not Vienna de Orshi. At this point, our heroine walked on, and the girl, perplexed, asked her to wait. She followed her sister as everyone joyfully greeted Baroness Trahan, Baroness Vienna Trahan. Kyra's father wanted to get through to her, but the audience also did not let him do this and began asking him all sorts of strange questions. Our heroine simply smiled as she walked through all the people. That was it now. It was a new beginning. After some time, the girl asked the maids if everything was ready, to which they only nodded their heads. Looking at the dress that Pelon had given her, the girl said that it was time to begin. Soon she was told that the second prince had arrived, and the girl immediately asked to let him in. As soon as he entered the room, he was incredibly shocked by the beauty he saw in front of him. Anyway, he decided to get all thoughts out of his head, so he extended his hand and said that it was time for them to go. Kyra smiled back at him and extended her hand, indicating that she was ready. Who knew that the day would come when her mate would be Pelon and not Raikon, whom she idolized? Pelon, noticing his fiancée's strange mood, asked her in surprise if she was okay. If something was wrong, she could tell him. He took her hand and squeezed it, letting her know that he would always be there and help her. Anyway, our heroine said everything was fine, and soon they went inside. It was her moment to shine. Kyra and Pelon walked together through the crowd, greeting both His Highness and Lady de Orche. At that very moment, someone began to announce that His Highness Raikon Swade Legret was entering. He soon appeared, and everyone began to greet him. The guy also happily greeted people, but at some point he noticed something strange. "Frozen," he said in horror, that Kara still hadn't put on the dress he so wanted to see on her. Pelon said he was glad Raikon had finally come here. Meanwhile, he looked at Kyra, perplexed that she'd come with his brother. How? Why? Despite Raikon's reaction, Kara bowed and greeted His Highness. She thanked him for accepting her invitations. Although with great difficulty, the guy finally told Lady Orsch that she looked wonderful today. The girl coolly thanked him for the compliment. With a smile on her face, she said that this dress was a gift from the second prince. Their family has excellent taste. She suddenly turned to Pelon and asked His Highness if he thought this dress suited her. Without thinking twice, he nodded. The girl thanked him for the compliment, while Raikon looked at them in bewilderment. Pelon continued to say that this dress suited her beautiful eyes and golden words. At that moment, Raikon heard the whispers of the maids behind him, discussing how the second prince smiled sweetly. Our heroine, in turn, thought that Raikon should not be angry because she did not accept his gift. Containing his emotions, Raikon calmly told Marquise Kara that the dress truly suited her. Once again, our heroine thanked the fifth prince for the compliment. At this point, Pelon asked Raikon in surprise if it was true that he always made his fiancée happy. He said he was often busy and couldn't always be around her, so he was glad he kept her from getting bored in her absence. Raikon asked, surprised. Meanwhile, people around them began to suspect that the rumors about the engagement being broken were untrue. It certainly seemed that way. Pelon and Kyra get along so well. And Lady de Orsch and Pelon at that moment looked at each other and smiled. She immediately recalled how she had asked His Highness 2 favors upon Melvin's arrival. Pelon asked if there was a letter sent to him. There was a letter, so Melvin handed it over. The letter said she asked him to do something at the upcoming ceremony. First, they needed to announce that their breakup was a lie. And the reason she's close to Pelon is because of him alone. At that moment, Pelon asked Raikon if he'd agreed to his fiancée's request. Of course, Raikon was a little tense because he most likely guessed what kind of request was being discussed. In the second request in the letter, our heroine asked Pelon to persuade Raikon to accompany Vienna. Kyra smiled and said that she was very worried that Vienna would not have a companion, so the fifth prince helped her a lot with this. Our heroine looked at Palon and was glad that he fulfilled all her requests. People around him happily started telling Rakan that he was such a kind and good person. Rakan wanted to say something, but people kept distracting him. Our heroine was very pleased to see the fifth prince's confused face. The girls were the elite of their empire. She even wondered what else they discussed in their circles. Imperial aristocracy, a term referring to the cream of society, those who unquestioningly carry out all the emperor's orders, like the de Orch family. Meanwhile, Countess Latrina Ingson was perplexed and asked who was saying that she agreed. Viscountess Milja Neuvan replied that she had heard it from her personally. Countess Lavian Bringle in turn asked them to stop, and lo and behold, the entire imperial aristocracy had truly gathered here. Milja Neuvan told the countess that she had spoken of breaking off the engagement between Lady de Orch and the prince, but that was not true. The girl, however, said she was certain of her words and that they were not suited to each other. Milja Neuvan assumed Latrina was trying to humiliate Lady de Orche. The girl asked what humiliation had to do with it if she was telling the truth. The de Orch family has long since faded into obscurity. Their former glory vanished into thin air. They are now completely indistinguishable from other marquises and counts. Our heroine is tired of hearing all this. That's why the girl decided to approach them and thank them for coming. Lavienne immediately told Lady Orch sweetly that they were pleased to meet and grateful for the invitation. Milja asked her how she was doing. It had been a while since they'd seen each other. Our heroine smiled and said that she had been so busy that she hadn't been able to drop in to visit him, but she promised that she would definitely come once she had sorted out all her affairs. At this point, Latrina Ingson asked Lady de Orch directly whether it was true that her affairs were connected with the rumors. Our heroine was certainly not prepared for such a question, so she didn't even know what to say. At that moment, someone put a hand on Kyra's shoulder and said that he thought they had seen enough to be convinced that the rumors were groundless. Of course, that person was His Highness, who decided to come and help his bride. All the girls immediately bowed before the second prince, without even saying a word. However, Palon looked at Lady Ingson and asked if she had heard him. He ordered her to explain what she meant by her strange and stupid words. Our heroine suddenly paused and wondered if she should stand up for them. She was about to open her mouth, but at that moment, Palon embraced her and turned to Latrina again. He reminded her that they knew Lady de Orchy was the most precious person in the world to him. The girl shuddered at every word of His Majesty and nodded her head guiltily. The guy then looked at her again and asked how she dared to speak so rudely of Lady de Orch. Did she really mean to insult him? His Majesty the Emperor constantly asks him when he and Kyra will marry. Did Count Ingson really tell his daughter otherwise? The girl, horrified, asked His Majesty how he could have thought such a thing. Absolutely not. Her father had never said anything of the sort. She had merely expressed herself incorrectly and begged for forgiveness. She fell to her knees and grabbed Lady de Orch's dress, starting to say that she had made a huge mistake. Palon looked at her and said that he hoped that she would not spread any more rumors about his beloved. The girl, horrified, said she understood His Highness and that this would never happen again. Soon after the girl left, our heroine was certainly perplexed and didn't even think that things could go this far. At this point, Palon turned to her and said that he needed to give her something, so he asked her to give him a minute of her time. The action shifted outside. It was quite warm there, but at that moment, Kyra felt something being put on her. She asked what it was. Palon told her that in the north, they are called silver foxes, but in truth they are white. The guy said that this fur coat was his catch from his last hunt, and he wanted to give it to her much earlier, but it didn't work out. Our heroine immediately began to apologize for not being with Palon at the time. His Majesty said it was no big deal. He immediately suggested she go hunting this year. What could he get for her? She replied that she would be happy with anything. In that case, the guy replied that he would give her something to his taste. Kara nodded her head shyly. However, at that moment, after Kara addressed him as His Highness, he only said, Palon. He smiled and asked to be called by that name, and soon after addressed Lady de Orch by her first name. The girl turned around in surprise, and Palon, perplexed, asked why she was surprised. After all, the letter had said he could address her that way. Kara remembered this well. She agreed since they still had to prove to people that they had a good relationship. Soon after, she looked up at the sky and thanked Palon for his help today, but from now on, she would try to cope on her own. The boy asked her in surprise what she wanted him to do, Was he supposed to just stand there and watch her get bullied? The girl understood his feelings, but they still needed to be careful with Count Ingson now. In his past life, the Count had supported Raykan, and it might be the same in this one. At that moment, Palon approached her and reminded her that he had promised to be on her side and that his promises were not empty words. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and said that she understood all of this, but she was still used to solving her own problems and asked him to understand this. The guy sighed heavily and said that he understood, and soon after asked if she would go hunting with him. The girl suddenly realized that she had been so busy with the Vienna coming-of-age ceremony that she had completely forgotten about other events. She had refused in the past, but she knew that this time she had to participate to strengthen their relationship and position, so she said she would try. The boy smiled and said he'd be happy to attend their first hunt together. At that moment, Melvin greeted His Majesty. Soon, Palon apologized and said that he needed to step away, and our heroine didn't mind, so she smiled and waved her hand at him. Looking back, our heroine said in surprise that it seemed as if nothing had changed here. But all this time, she and Palon were being watched by one person who was not particularly happy with their union. Raykan decided to approach Kara, who upon seeing him, asked in surprise what he was doing there. She asked surprised if he really wanted to say something. Raykan said yes, and he wanted to know why she was behaving so terribly. Squeezing her hand, he said that he had already answered her request in the letter to accompany Lady Trahan. He had refused. Our heroine apologized, saying that in addition to rumors about her breakup with the prince, there were also gossips about their relationship, and she couldn't just leave it that way. The guy, perplexed, asked her if they were really talking about their relationship. Kyra nodded her head and said that she didn't even know if this was a good way to save both his and her honor in the eyes of others, but she decided to do it. In any case, she hoped that people would no longer say such things once they knew that he was supposedly a partner of Vienna. She glanced at him and said it was just an act, a simple performance, as if he were a prince on a white horse, saving the poor baroness from loneliness. Holding the marquise's hand, the young man explained that all these rumors were fueled by gossip about the broken engagement. Kara apologized for everything happening so suddenly. She didn't mean to scare him. He sighed and realized that all of this was for him, so he calmed down a little. Kyra smiled and thanked Raykan. She soon reminded him to remember to dance with Vienna that day, and she in turn would be with Palon. Hearing his brother's name, the boy asked the girl in bewilderment if she really already called his brother by his name. Kyra instantly blushed and said that it was true, because by the way, they were not only breaking off the engagement, but also planning to get married. The guy, perplexed, began to ask the girl if he heard these words correctly. Kyra, however, continued to talk about her own, saying that when all this happens, all questions will definitely disappear by themselves, and she will definitely stop the rumors about him. The guy was about to say something, but our heroine turned around, apologized to Raykan, and said that she had to go. At that very moment, he grabbed her hand and suggested that she stop hiding their feelings. With a smile on his face, he asked her to become his bride and not to marry his brother. Holding her hand, he reminded her how she asked if he would take her back if the engagement was called off, and this was his final answer. Kyra reminded him in surprise that when she asked him, he pretended not to hear her question. But now what? He kissed her hand and said he'd thought about it for a long time. After all, she was a noblewoman in the Legret Empire, and no one else would be suitable for him. The girl pressed her lip. Just look at this jerk! He doesn't even hide the fact that he wants to use him to gain a favorable position. How could she have fallen for him so stupidly? At that very moment, she pulled her hand away and asked why he wasn't listening to her. There were already all sorts of rumors about them. Raykan asked his dear Kara not to be sad, because he had already said that he had thought about this for a long time, and now he was ready. However, Kyra told him not to touch her, because if anyone saw, they would start gossiping even more. The guy, perplexed, asked what was wrong, because in this world it was impossible to hide anything. He didn't care what others thought. Was she really so nervous because of the late answer? The girl looked down bitterly and told Raykan that he must accept the truth. They were friends, not lovers. She said that it was too late to change anything, so she believed that he could find a woman much better than her. Once again, he took her hand, and with horror in his eyes asked what nonsense she was talking about. Had she really deceived him? The girl once again pulled her hand away and said that all their childhood promises were in the past and could not be brought back. Soon our heroine entered the palace, and the maid, as soon as she found her mistress, said that Lady Vienna was looking for her. She said that there were too many people here, so she asked her sister to come to her room. Our heroine immediately smiled, thinking that this idiot Raken had ruined her mood, but she thought that the sight of a morally destroyed Vienna would bring her to her senses. Kyra immediately asked the maid where Vienna was. The maid told her she was in her room and seemed very upset. These words were as sweet as honey to our heroine, so she turned and asked the woman to lead her to her. After a while, Kara went inside and asked her sister if she'd been looking for her and why she was swearing. Had the maids done something wrong? By the way, she turned to the maids and asked them to leave while they talked. The women, of course, would not have resisted the mistress's words, so without further questions, they headed for the exit. At that moment, Vienna started telling her sister that she should have introduced her as Vienna de Orsha. So why didn't she? What about her promise to her father? Kyra didn't expect any other reaction. She apologized to her sister and said there was a reason her engagement would soon be broken off. The girl, perplexed, asked if Prince Palon had really ordered their engagement broken. Kyra said it was true. They had discussed it today. However, Vienna still asked what this had to do with her, because she was asking why Kyra did not allow her to become part of the De Orshi family. Our heroine asked her in surprise if she really didn't know. The reason the emperor was personally insisting on a breakup was very simple. The thing is, he doesn't really like their family, and so she asked what Vienna would do about their bad reputation. However, she took her sister's hand and said that she thought the fifth prince was showing sympathy towards her. Vienna asked in surprise if they were talking about Prince Raken. Our heroine nodded and said that he often asked about her. After all, maybe he would become a princess. The girl asked again in surprise. Then she told her sister that she had nothing at all, so how could she become one? Kyra convinced her sister that he definitely liked her, which meant anything was possible. She still asked how. The girl immediately said that she was quite close to the fifth prince, but for the sake of her beloved sister Vienna, she would reduce their communication. She also promised to try to see him as little as possible, and in return, she would be there for him instead of her. Holding her sister's hand, she said that because she was a baroness, there might be some difficulties, but who knows how our life will turn out. Today, she's a baroness, and tomorrow she could be empress. With such a title, she knows the world will be at her feet, and every subject will show her respect. Listening to these beautiful words from her sister Vienna could not get enough of them. She immediately ran to Kyra, with hugs saying that now she understood everything. She thanked her for how much she cared about her. Smiling slyly, she simply thought about how kind Kyra was. "What can I say, thank you, little sister?" Our heroine said that trusting her was all that was needed. Just like her father had said, they were sisters, and no one could stop them. Vienna agreed with Kyra. Soon the girl even said she'd prepared something for her, so she asked me to bring a gift. In front of Vienna, a gorgeous blue dress was visible, one we'd seen somewhere before. Our heroine smiled just as slyly and told her sister it was a gift for her. Did she like it? Vienna looked at this dress with admiration and asked how one could not like such beauty. She immediately began to thank her sister for such a gift, but our heroine asked Vienna in surprise if she noticed anything strange. The girl explained that this dress goes with the fifth prince's costume, and she in turn has a pair of clothes with Palon. She said the fifth prince had sent her this dress. Vienna was very surprised. Our heroine told her sister that the guy was afraid that Palon, due to rumors about the broken engagement, could ruin her ceremony, so he sent this dress showing how much he cares about her honor. The girl was incredibly happy. At that moment, Kara said that the dress came with accessories and a fan. She added in conclusion that Vienna should put it on and dance with the fifth prince. And we almost forgot one more important thing. Kyra even got her sister some shoes. Soon after, she walked towards the exit, saying that she hoped to see her in the dress soon. Our heroine understood that Vienna must become a princess for Raken, and then they both would fall into her trap. After some time, Vienna came down, and in the midst of a whole crowd of people, tried to find the fifth prince. Meanwhile, Rakan was walking around the floor with a calm face and looking around when suddenly, in front of him, he noticed a joyful Vienna, who was wearing the dress he had given Kara. He didn't understand why both the dress and the donated accessories were in Vienna. He immediately looked at Kara in bewilderment, realizing that this was most likely her doing. At this moment, our heroine leaned towards her sister and said that the prince must be so surprised because of her beauty. Vienna, realizing that the dance was about to begin, approached His Highness and asked if he would agree to dance the first dance with her. Everyone around started whispering about Prince Rakan and Lady Trahan, who looked beautiful. What's more, they were wearing matching outfits. Realizing that Rakan could not do otherwise, he smiled sweetly and extended his hand to his so-called beloved. Soon they went dancing, which our heroine was delighted about. Then she met Palin. The boy, surprised, asked Kara if she was already there. However, the girl whispered to His Highness if he had time. He immediately turned to his subjects and said he needed to retreat. Soon he turned to Kara and said they were free to go. The guy said he'd been looking for her everywhere and wanted to know where she'd been. The girl said she'd been helping her sister with her dress and had gone away. Palin asked if cousins should help each other. Kara replied that Vienna was the only one with her. An unknown woman overheard the whole thing. At that moment, the second prince asked the girl if the maids couldn't help Vienna. Why couldn't she change her clothes herself? Our heroine wanted to say something, but at that moment, a woman approached them and said that Lady Orsh knew how difficult it was to put on such beautiful dresses, so she offered to help. If this was true, Palin said it was quite selfless, because in the end, no one would even thank her for it. Our heroine looked down sheepishly and said everything was fine. She didn't need any thanks. The woman suddenly said she was about to burst into tears. How good the relationship between the sisters is. Palin expressed surprise at the many confusing rules in the world of women. He thanked Countess Harpan, as without her, he wouldn't have understood this situation. Our heroine looked at the woman again in bewilderment, not believing it was Countess Harpan. She was quite an important figure in the aristocratic world. Her sudden disappearance from society gave rise to a whole series of strange rumors, and Vienna kept repeating how she wanted to be friends with hers. Harpan smiled and told Palin that she and her husband had been married for more than 10 years, and he still wasn't very knowledgeable about women. The second prince laughed and thanked the countess anyway. He needed to discuss something with Lady Orsha, so he said they would step aside. As Palin walked forward, Kara knew she had to follow him, but she also had to say one last thing. The girl turned and thanked the countess, because thanks to her explanation, His Highness was able to understand her better. Harpan said she was only too happy to help, and also delighted that they had finally met. They hadn't had the opportunity before. Our heroine was surprised that she was looking for it. But why? Apparently, because she changed the past, the future would now change too. Kyra understood that Countess Harpan had many followers, and this was a great opportunity. At this point, the Countess said that, to be honest, His Majesty, the Emperor asked if she could give her eldest daughter to the imperial family. He wanted her to marry the second prince, and was quite surprised by such a proposal, but he thinks that her eldest daughter is not good enough for such a thing. Nevertheless, she said she was very grateful to Kara for being with him, and yet our heroine couldn't understand why the heroine wanted to meet her. At that moment, the woman said directly that she would be on Kara's side to protect her daughter. Our heroine, perplexed, asked if she really. Harpan interrupted her and told the lady she was right. So then, was she ready to shake her hand? Although the Empress is the center of their society, Countess Harpan plays a far from insignificant role, so her support is only to her advantage. She understood she would have a powerful ally. Our heroine suddenly asked the Countess if she really thought she was right for the role. Taking her hand, the woman said that she was sure of it, so she wished her luck. Our heroine thanked the Countess, but she replied that she should be thanking Kara. She then said that she would soon send her an invitation to introduce her people. After some time, the first dance finally ended, which, as expected, Vienna and Rakan performed together. As soon as the dance ended, the guy didn't even look at his partner, but stared into the distance. It wasn't hard to guess where he was looking, but our heroine couldn't understand why he was looking at her like that. The guy smiled sweetly at her, whispering syllable by syllable to Kyra, but she in turn silently left. As soon as our heroine had gone a short distance, her father came running towards her and grabbed her. The girl wanted to ask something, but he didn't let her do it, and simply told her to follow him. Kyra pulled her hand away and said that she didn't have time for this, because His Highness was waiting for her. In this case, the man told her to move, because he needed to discuss something with her. However, at that moment, she heard someone's footsteps behind her. Who could it be? A silhouette was approaching her from the shadows, getting closer and closer, and with each step, its features became more and more visible. Sure enough, it turned out to be Rakan. Our heroine walked past him in surprise and asked where Vienna was. The guy screamed in bewilderment and asked why she was setting her up with her sister. Grabbing her hand, he told her he had no feelings for her sister. With ice, he decided to ask her what she had been doing with his brother, and where they had been. The guy was squeezing her hand so tightly that our heroine's face even twisted. She ordered him to let go. Rakan was incredibly angry. He started shouting and ordering Kyra de Orshi to answer his question, but at that moment, someone called out to Rakan Suede. The guy turned around in bewilderment, asking who dared call him that. The two brothers' eyes met, and Rakan realized he was wrong, so he looked away. As soon as Palon's brother calmed down, the boy asked Kara in surprise what was going on here. At that moment, Rakan decided to apologize. Palon laughed and asked if he was really the one asking. He looked at Lady Orsh and told him that he thought he had been very rude to her. The guy looked down guiltily and apologized to the girl, saying that he was angry because she was trying to get him closer to Vienna. At that moment, tears began to flow from his eyes, and the guy, perplexed, began to say that he thought that she did not want to see him anymore. Our heroine was quite surprised by what was happening and couldn't even figure out if it was true, or maybe he was putting on another show. Our heroine looked at him coldly and said that she accepted his apology. Soon after, she turned around and told Palon that they had to go. Rakan started shouting and asking Kara to wait, because he wasn't finished yet. He still had something to say. However, the girl apologized to her fiancé and said that she would try not to create such humiliating situations with Prince Rakan again. She assumed she needed to clarify something. Kara glanced at Rakan and told him she was staying with Palon as his fiancé. The boy looked down in disappointment and said he understood. Kara said she really hoped so. However, he understood that Kyra was his closest friend and should understand him. At this moment, Palon put his hand on the bride's head and asked if she was ill by any chance, as she looked quite tired. If she wasn't sick, he'd be glad, but he still didn't know how to help her. The girl was stunned. Continuing to stare at Kyra, Palon assumed that she was so upset, perhaps because something was hurting her. In any case, he decided that if it wasn't so, then he didn't even know what could cheer her up. He asked her, surprised, what made her laugh. For example, he could tell her a joke. Melvin once told him an interesting story he wanted to share with her. Once upon a time, a girl from the village. Our heroine laughed and told Kara that he was very sweet. She was grateful for his concern, but she was still okay. Coming closer to her and taking her bow in his hands, he said that he was very glad to hear it. Kyra was once again convinced of how caring he was. Just as he finally finished adjusting her bow, he asked where they were going. He offered to walk her to the lounge. However, our heroine immediately remembered her father, whom she didn't particularly want to run into. She had to stall for time. She immediately asked the second prince to stay with her until the end of the banquet. Only he could help her. Although Palon was surprised, he agreed to the marquise's request without any hesitation. Our heroine was glad to hear this, but you couldn't tell from Melvin's face that he was happy. Kyra let go of his hand. Then if he was busy, she didn't want Palon to have any trouble because of her, but at that moment, he took her hand. The guy said everything was fine. Kyra was surprised and asked if he was telling the truth. The prince said he wouldn't lie to her, but Melvin quickly left. Palon didn't even notice this, and only when he approached Madame de Orsh did he suggest that she go to the banquet hall. A short time later, they arrived at the hall. Sure enough, Kara's father was there, bewildered, explaining that he'd been waiting for her there for 100 years. Palon immediately greeted the marquise, saying they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The man was surprised that his daughter was still with the second prince. He apologized to His Highness, saying that he had urgent business. The marquis immediately said goodbye to the boys and wished them a good evening. Palon thanked him for this. Kara was only too happy with how quickly everything was resolved. Palon, surprised, asked the lady if she was really avoiding the marquise. In any case, he said that if she needed him again, she should not hesitate to speak up right away, because her fiancé was always ready to help. Our heroine smiled sweetly at him and thanked him for his kindness. After all, thanks to him, she had had a wonderful evening. At this point, Palon blushed a little, if you can say so, of course. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and asked if he was by any chance tired. The guy said that everything was fine, but something in his behavior had changed, so Kara kept asking if he was definitely okay. Realizing that he wouldn't be able to get rid of her, he decided to say that he remembered one important job. He immediately turned around and said that if she didn't need help, he'd step aside. Watching Palon leave, our heroine realized he was truly busy. Meanwhile, the guy was thinking that he should call a doctor because it seemed like his temperature had risen and his heart was beating so fast he didn't want any misunderstandings. Melvin said that he thought Lady Orshi would be glad to hear it from him, but he would still keep His Highness's secret. However, Palon's guard asked him to think carefully about it. It is because of her that he is now so embarrassed that he cannot look her in the eyes. The next morning, our heroine thought that the ceremony had been quite successful. One way or another, she couldn't understand only one thing. Why was her heart so uneasy? She turned to her mother and asked her if she was doing the right thing now. On the second floor, there is a room where my mother's things are kept, and only she had a key to it. Our heroine decided to go there, and as soon as she went inside, she said with disappointment that she hadn't been there for a long time. At that moment, she walked up to one of the chests of drawers, and her eye fell on a drawer, which she decided to open. Opening it, she noticed a whole pile of her mother's jewelry, and our heroine immediately remembered her mother and could not understand why everything happened this way. At that moment, someone noticed the open door and asked in confusion why it was open. Looking inside, it turned out to be Vienna, who was interested in who was inside. Our heroine, seeing her sister, immediately closed the box and put it back in place. Vienna approached her sister and asked her in surprise why she was there. Our heroine asked her the same question. The girl said she just saw it was open and decided to come in. Is it really impossible? Our heroine said she was right. You can't come in here. She immediately started looking around, suspecting there were valuables there. Vienna asked if she could take anything from there. Kyra crossed her arms and shook her head, making it clear that she was not allowed to do so. She said they were her mother's things, but Vienna wasn't even going to listen to her sister. Noticing the beautiful box, she went to it. The girl turned around and asked her sister in surprise what kind of box it was. It seemed to contain precious stones, but why wouldn't it open? Our heroine approached her sister and once again told her that she was not allowed to touch all these things. Besides, she said that this box can only be opened by the owner's touch. Vienna said it was quite interesting, but she was only thinking about how much beauty there was inside. Looking at her sister again, the girl began to beg her to take at least one thing from there. She reached out her hand, but at that moment, someone grabbed her hand, preventing her from touching the box. Andreas, even though he was Vienna's brother, he was loyal only to her until her last breath. Since childhood, the boy constantly worried about his sister Kyra. Whenever she looked ill, he was a good younger brother. At that moment, the guy, perplexed, asked his sister what she was doing because this was a forbidden room, and therefore she had to leave right now. Vienna snorted and said that she didn't really need those stupid stones. At this moment, our heroine turned to Andreas and, taking his hand, thanked him for his understanding. She understood that, because of her, he had a lot on his plate. Nevertheless, the boy apologized for his sister's terrible behavior. Kyra gave him one last scratch on the head and told him everything was okay, then said they had to go. Then Andreas turned around and told Kara that Vienna wasn't as good as it seemed. In any case, it was time for him to go. Our heroine was very happy that she now had two people who were definitely on her side. One way or another, even though it was late, she assured herself that this time she would definitely not let them down. After a while, the action shifts to the kitchen. Our heroine looked around in confusion, wondering where everyone was. Why was it so quiet? In any case, she looked at the fire and decided that she should add some sticks to the fire so that it would not go out. As soon as the girl did this, she sat down in front of the fire. At that moment, someone called her. It turned out it was Henny. The girl, perplexed, asked her why she was looking at her like that if she just wanted to help. The fire was about to go out, so she decided to add a few branches. What was the best way to do that? At that moment, Henny asked the girl not to do anything. Kara looked at her in confusion and asked what was wrong. Judging by her voice, it seemed she was holding a lot back. In any case, the woman took on the job herself. Our heroine said that starting a fire was a real challenge. Henny, surprised, asked the lady what would happen if she got hurt. Kyra, perplexed, asked Henny what was wrong with her voice, to which the woman replied that it was because of the smoke from the fireplace that had gotten inside. Although our heroine didn't understand what kind of smoke they were talking about, she cleared her throat and decided to say thank you. The girl admitted that she'd never said it, but thanks to her, they didn't have to worry about kitchen chores after their mother's death. Anyway, deciding that Henny was still busy, she apologized for disturbing him and headed out. At this point, the maids, perplexed, began asking each other why they weren't greeting each other. Nevertheless, our heroine told Soren that everything was fine. She had come into the kitchen without asking. The maid asked in surprise how her mistress knew her name. Kyra replied, surprised that her name was Soren, wasn't it? At this point, the girl, surprised, pointed to another maid and asked if the mistress knew her name. Kara replied that it was Marina who had replaced Sophia. At that very moment, the girls asked the lady to give them a few minutes of her time. After some time, they were sitting at the table, and the girls asked that all of this was apparently untrue rumors. Our heroine realized they had formed a false impression of her. She immediately asked who had told them and what. Soren asked them not to be angry with them because they had something to ask her for. As the Marquis said, he wants to change the entire staff, and they thought that she might. In general, the butler Vosel said that she didn't give a damn about them. Our heroine was shocked that he had the courage to say such nasty things. She decided she should talk to him. Butler Vosel is from a family that has served her mother's line for generations. But why is he? At that moment, he opened his creaky door and asked the lady in surprise why she was there. The girl said she had a question. As soon as they entered, the butler apologized for the mess and immediately offered a cup of tea, but warned that it was hot. Kyra immediately told him that she heard something strange. It seemed like he was planning to leave somewhere. The butler left the mansion around this time in the past and went to the Roam estate. It seems his grandfather's health had deteriorated at that time, and there was no replacement. Now that she thinks about it, it sounds pretty strange. Could it be that he didn't leave for Rome, but was simply fired? Vosel told his mistress that he was only a servant, so when he was told to leave, he must obey. Kyra, perplexed, asked who had said that. The man replied that he was told about this immediately after Miss Vienna's coming-of-age ceremony. Our heroine assumed that he apparently didn't care at all about her opinion. The man, perplexed, said that this was not so. He simply did not want to disturb her, since the situation on the estate had become a bit tense. Kyra decided to ask just one question. Did he want to leave? Votzel immediately replied that he didn't. In that case, she told him to stay, and he again began to say that the Marquise told him that he wanted to fire all the old employees and hire new staff. Our heroine couldn't even understand why her father needed all this. Why was he so hastily firing all his previous employees? She suddenly asked the butler if he remembered what his mother had said before she died. The man said he would always remember this. The woman asked him to protect Lady Kara. Our heroine responded by saying she'd told her the same thing. She had to protect her family until the very end, which is why she valued them so much. Looking at the butler Vosel, the girl asked if he would take her side. The man bowed and told her that, of course, he agreed, and she could only tell him what to do. Soon after, he decided to ask how she was going to leave the old staff here. He reminded her that the Marquise was currently in power. Kyra understood that her father was the head of the family, meaning she wouldn't be able to undo anything. At that moment, she decided that the only possible solution was to take his place. She asked Vosel to bring her the house register, which contains all the contracts with employees' statements of monthly wages and purchases of necessary goods. The man wanted to say something in opposition, but our heroine assured him that she needed everything she had. After some time, he brought her the book, and the first thing he asked her to do was not tell anyone. Vosel still couldn't understand why she needed it. The girl understood that in the past, this information hadn't interested her at all. As she began to study it, she noticed that there were several unclear points in the spending history. It's been 8 years since her mother died, and her father took over. But since when has he been doing this? Vosel at this point asked Mrs. Kara if she knew how to use the book. She just said it didn't matter at all. All that mattered was how much money her father spent. At that very moment, our heroine began to feel an unknown strange pain from above and did not understand what was happening. Vosel, perplexed, asked the girl what had happened. Had she really gotten sick? Our heroine felt that she really felt unwell, but she still decided to say that everything was fine and that she was just worried. She suddenly asked if Vosel was aware that something was wrong with the book at home. She then asked if he and her father had had any arguments. The man said there weren't any. Our heroine, however, added that he most likely noticed the missing expenses and asked her father to fill them in, but he got angry and said he'd fire him. Our heroine told him again that as long as she was here, he would not go anywhere, and moreover, she would raise his salary and improve his living conditions. Still looking around, she couldn't understand how the butler of the Orshi family could look like this. At that moment, the butler finally realized what Kyra was planning to do and cried out in bewilderment. The girl smiled and told him that she would indeed become the chief marquise. It was the most obvious and immediate solution for them. By the way, there's a document her mother had certified by His Majesty. She'll take it and go to the emperor. That's why she smiled looking at Votzel and asked him to leave this little problem to her. A short time later, our heroine was walking down the hallway and saw new maids. Apparently, her father had already put his plan into action. At that moment, Kara ordered the maids to clean the hall where the Vienna ceremony was taking place, and to do it quickly. She understood that if everything went back to the way her father wanted her life would again become miserable and worthless. However, there was a problem. She didn't know how to get to His Majesty. Of all the people she knows, she can only ask Palon Saig. She takes advantage of his kindness too often. She immediately decided to put these thoughts out of her head, thinking that she needed to distract herself. At that moment, Jane entered the room and addressed Mrs. Kara, asking if she was resting. The girl holding flowers said that she was very glad that the Miss Vienna ceremony went well. Our heroine, looking at Jane, immediately remembered that she wanted to ask her something. Thinking back to the situation where Kyra saw the dress Raken gave her, and her confusion about what it was doing there, some things became clear. The girl, of course, asked the maids why they brought it, but they embarrassedly said that Jane brought it. Our heroine couldn't understand why this was so, and the girl said that someone saw Jane talking to Prince Raken, and after that, she brought the dress into the room. She didn't have time to address the issue then, but the time came. Kyra said directly that she had learned about Jane bringing a blue dress. Why? The girl immediately flinched. She began apologizing and begging for forgiveness, saying that the prince had asked for it so urgently and she couldn't refuse. As he said, he wouldn't leave her alone until she put him there. She apologized again for doing it behind her back. The girl, her voice low, admitted that she simply didn't know what else to do. Our heroine told her that everything was fine, and she forgave her, but she no longer had to follow his orders. The girl said she understood Kara suddenly asked her if she had come here on the emperor's orders. Wasn't she sad? 2 years ago, when her engagement to Palon was officially announced, the palace sent her a maid. It was Jane. Even though she worked on their estate, she still belonged to the palace. Kara, looking at Jane, reminded her that she was just as much a noblewoman as she was, but she was forced to call her mistress. However, she noted that she didn't address Vienna that way. The girl said she didn't care, since she simply came to work on the emperor's orders. Then she said her father worked for Kara, so she had no reason to address her any differently. Our heroine suddenly asked what about Vienna. She wasn't at all interested in what she thought of her. She just wanted to know what she thought of Vienna. After all, she couldn't trust everyone completely. She couldn't let her maid side with her father, Vienna, and perhaps Rakan. At that moment, the girl said that frankly, she didn't particularly like Vienna. She was here to serve Kara, not her. Our heroine said that was true because that's what she was sent here for, so she doesn't have to do anything concerning her family, just what she says. Kyra didn't want to doubt her loyal friend, but such were the times these days. Jane, however, agreed with her mistress without hesitation. After her rebirth, our heroine began to notice a host of problems she'd previously overlooked. She had no idea who else might stab her in the back, considering that Rakan, whom she loved with all her heart, and Vienna, whom she truly considered her sister, simply betrayed her. Our heroine asked Jane to get her hair and dress ready. She needed to see how the tea party preparations were going. The coming-of-age ceremony varies depending on the circumstances. Everyone making their debut at the event must do 2 additional things. Firstly, it was necessary to hold a tea party with noblewomen the day after his ceremony and an aristocratic ball. This means all Kyra needs to do is show up for tea and try to establish contact with the noblewomen without Vienna doing it for her. The venue is the Lucette Room. The tea party is attended by high society girls in expensive gowns, so it is held indoors. As soon as our heroine opened the door, she heard Vienna talking about how her little sister had been busy lately because of her. Just yesterday she held a ceremony for her, and today she had tea. She is so grateful to her. Aristocrats told Vienna she was very sweet, and that of course no one could leave her alone at such important moments. It's impossible to cope alone. She continued to tell the girls something, trying to instill in them a false opinion of herself. A thin, sweet voice, simply perfect for gaining sympathy and understanding. One of the aristocrats screamed in bewilderment and asked Vienna how she could do this to her. At that very moment, our heroine was approached by a butler who handed her a gift from the 5th prince. In the past, Rakan always gave her flowers when he felt guilty. She assumed he wanted to apologize for yesterday. Our heroine grinned and soon asked Mary to open the door for her. A moment later, Kara stepped inside. Our heroine decided that it was high time to make this dull tea party a little more fun. Kyra greeted all the ladies sweetly, saying that she had no idea they had decided to gather early. Our heroine noticed Vienna's sadness at that moment, but told her there was good news. The fifth prince had sent her a gift, apparently especially for tea. Having handed the gift to her sister, she asked her to open it as quickly as possible. All the girls around her also started to support her and ask Lady Tran to open the gift because they were also interested in what was inside. Opening the box, the girl noticed that there were beautiful and lush flowers inside. The aristocrats were perplexed. How beautiful! But why flowers? In any case, they decided that Vienna was definitely the fifth prince's cup of tea. Our heroine suddenly asked in surprise if there was a small card inside. She knew Raken never sent gifts without a card or postcard. Vienna finally got her hands on the card. They'd be surprised the prince even sent her one. Everyone was talking about how cute it was and asking to quickly tell them what was written there. But at that moment, Vienna's face changed. Our heroine said that she was almost 100% sure that this was a declaration of love, or something along those lines. Meanwhile, Vienna looked at her sister with envy, because even though she had been friends with the fifth prince for quite a long time, he had never sent her anything like this. Kyra in turn grinned, knowing her name was on the card. Seeing her sister's confused expression, she immediately felt so good. After some time, the action moves to the chambers of the fifth prince, who shouted in bewilderment at his assistant. The boy, horrified, said that Miss Orshi must have misunderstood. As soon as he handed over the gift, she immediately ran to give it to Miss Trahan. However, he said that Miss Trahan was glad Raken said that he didn't care. God! Kyra gave his gift to a homeless girl. At that moment, he remembered the card and asked what had happened to it. The aide told His Majesty that Miss Trahan had also taken the card. The guy said people apparently misunderstood the gentleman's dance with Miss Trahan yesterday. However, Raken ordered them to stop talking nonsense. He sat down and thought it was Kara who had asked him to dance with Vienna. But why then? He instantly realized what was happening, but he couldn't understand why he hadn't realized it immediately. Kyra used to be so obedient, but now something's definitely wrong with her. What happened to her? Why? That was the only question that swirled around the fifth prince's mind. He assumed she was deeply offended by his delay in answering her. Glancing at his assistant, he asked him if Kara hadn't even asked anything. The man sighed and said nothing at all. She was sure the flowers were for Lady Trahan. I didn't understand why she didn't even check the box. Kara de Orshi, is this really such a showy protest? The assistant asked His Majesty whether he should send flowers again, to which Raken replied that there was no need to do so. However, the guy began to tell the gentleman that Lady Orsh might misunderstand him. Rakan shouted again, reminding him that he had only just said that he was free to go. The boy immediately left the room. Rakan thought about everything for a long time, and still decided that Kara was very cunning, and she was really offended by this stupidity. He was absolutely certain she had done it on purpose. Kara had deliberately given the gift to her sister. Of course it was, so he understood that he knew everything about her, and yet it was nice when two sisters fought for his attention. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. The boy, confused, asked who it was, and they immediately apologized for the unexpected visit. The man entered the room and said that he had been told the words of the fifth prince who wanted to see him. Meanwhile, our heroine was happy that the tea party on the occasion of her sister's coming-of-age ceremony had finally begun. No matter how small it is, it's still an official appointment. She's been preparing for this since early morning, but her headache just won't go away. Should she take some medicine? The maid approached her mistress and asked if she was okay. Kyra, surprised, asked Soren where she was from. The girl pointed into the distance and said that she had just arrived because they needed to serve cold appetizers. Our heroine assumed that she was very tired because, after all, she had been cooking for everyone for several days in a row. Soren apologized to the lady for the prejudice they had shown towards her. She took Kara's hand, which surprised her, and then said she hadn't even known Kara was so caring. And again, she apologized. Soren's older brother was a knight, and she herself, incidentally, was an excellent swordsman. Apparently, this was how she showed her loyalty. Smiling again, the girl told the lady not to worry, and she in turn would prepare everything. Our heroine thanked her and thought to herself that it was good that she was her maid. It's crucial to build good relationships with the existing staff rather than simply hiring new ones. Once this is all over, it's time to speak with the butler. Several carriages arrived, and one of them was so distinctive that Vienna couldn't stop admiring it, and Kyra knew who its owner was. At that moment, a woman got out of the carriage and immediately greeted Lady de Orsh. Our heroine smiled and greeted Lady Milia She is the eldest daughter of Viscount Neuvan, a girl from the capital with a vast fortune. Kyra pointed to her sister and said that this was Lady Trahan, the woman they had all gathered for. Milia greeted her, saying they hadn't had a chance to talk before. Vienna began telling her how happy she was that Milia had attended their modest banquet. She immediately invited them inside, where she would show them everything. After a while, the girl introduced herself and again thanked Milia for visiting her today. And by the way, she hoped that she would like it there. Watching them converse, our heroine assumed they were getting along well. Could Lady Milia really be on Vienna's side in this life? At that moment, someone addressed Kyra, and it turned out to be Lady Lavienne. Our heroine asked her when she had arrived. The girl sheepishly said she was a little late because she miscalculated the time. This was Lady Milia's friend, Lady Lavienne Bringle. Kyra smiled and told her that everything was fine, as she had arrived just in time. The girl thanked Lady d'Orchy for her understanding. However, she asked Kyra why Lady Trahan was pretending to be so friendly with Lady Milia. Our heroine smiled and said that she herself did not understand, since they were seeing each other for the first time. Then, still with the same smile, the girl looked at Lady Lavienne and asked if she knew anything. However, the girl didn't have time to say anything because the knights announced that Prince Rakenswade Legret had arrived. Our heroine didn't understand what he was doing there since he wasn't invited. Why would he come here? In any case, she went up to Vienna and whispered in his ear that the fifth prince had arrived, which meant she should go and say hello to him. The girl, without thinking twice, went to meet him, and at first, she was even a little embarrassed. In any case, she bowed and said she was glad to meet him, showing her joy that he had arrived. But after a moment, her face changed from happiness to shock, because the first thing the fifth prince said was, "Where is your sister?" Lavienne was immediately surprised that the prince was looking for Kyra. Our heroine said that might be true, but she thought it would be better to give them some privacy. The girl looked at our heroine with admiration and asked if she really wanted to hide from him. In any case, she abruptly picked up the glass of champagne and spilled it on her dress. Our heroine asked what had happened, and Lavienne Bringle told her that was the excuse. Now they could go to the restroom. After some time, the girl told Lady Orsh that she was truly noble and her concern for her sister. Even in the Count's estate, everyone was talking only about her. Our heroine asked again. Surprised Lavienne said she'd thrown a wonderful party for Lady Trahan. Even though they'd only met a year ago, she'd prepared such a gift. Countess Harpon tells everyone about her kindness, so she wants to do something for her too. Our heroine was glad that Lady Harpon had already begun to act. At that very moment, Lavienne Bringle turned to Kyra and said that she wanted to ask something. She extended her hand, smiled, and asked if they could be friends. Of course, the girl happily agreed and told Lady Lavienne she could call her Kai. Only those closest to her were allowed to call her that. At that point, Lavienne Bringle smiled and told her new friend that she could call her Lavise. Our heroine smiled sweetly at her, another aristocrat, but on her side, how could she disagree? She ultimately left the lady in the restroom and went into the banquet hall. The atmosphere inside was friendly. In the center of the hall, men and women danced smoothly to the beat, exchanging compliments and smiling at each other. Of course, among them all, there was Vienna, which did this business more successfully than anyone else. At that moment, while our heroine was walking down the corridor, someone called her. Turning around, she bowed and told Her Highness that she was glad to meet them. Raken asked her in surprise why he hadn't seen her. Had she really just arrived? She replied that Lady Bringle had spilled champagne on herself, so they went to the restroom. She immediately asked if he had said hello to Vienna. The guy immediately said he didn't understand why she kept asking about her. What even happened to the flowers he sent her yesterday? Our heroine asked again in surprise, then realized he was talking about a gift. Kyra replied that she had given it to Vienna and that she was very happy. The guy sighed in surprise and asked if she really didn't know anything. In that case, he figured they could skip it. Maybe she really didn't know, after all it was her first time. Kyra didn't understand what "for the first time" meant. In any case, the fifth prince told her they needed to talk, so they should step aside. But this was not possible, because now the knights announced that His Highness Palon Swale Legret had arrived. Our heroine immediately approached him joyfully and said that he had said that he would not be able to come. The guy kissed her hand and said he had some free time. Was he really that late? Our heroine said that he doesn't have to talk nonsense, because he's just in time. At that moment, the guy leaned over and asked Kyra if they could step away for a moment. She agreed without hesitation. Soon he took her hand, and they were about to go to a quieter place. Surprisingly, once again, the fifth prince shouted after his brother and Kara to stop. Nevertheless, after a while, they were outside. It was strange. Winter was already approaching. She remembered how the last time she attended the Vienna ceremony, it hadn't been this cold. Palon suddenly turned to the girl and said he thought she looked uncomfortable, so he asked her to go away with him. He hoped he hadn't ruined anything. Our heroine smiled and said that it was thanks to him that she didn't have to stand there and be bored. Palon immediately decided to start the topic for his brother and assumed that Raken was bothering her with his stupid questions. The girl said that she didn't like his behavior, but she didn't really want to waste her nerves and time on him. Palon thought about it and told her in response that at this rate she would become emotional. Emotionality. She simply cannot give in to unnecessary emotions if she does not want a repeat of her past miserable life. At that moment, the second prince poked her in the forehead with his finger and said that if she didn't like something, she could speak about it openly. If something is bothering her and she is silent, then he feels strange being around her. Our heroine didn't understand what he was talking about, so she decided to ask Palon more specifically what he meant. The guy said he felt like she was deliberately pushing away people who wanted to get closer to her. Our heroine couldn't understand whether it was so obvious even Palon realized it. Could Raken have realized it too? The guy suddenly said that in this way, she resembled his deceased mother, which is why he started this conversation. Our heroine asked again what she and the Empress meant. Palon replied that when someone becomes impatient, they can do stupid things. Kyra was confused, wondering what he was talking about, but she decided to ask him what he thought she was like. She felt like he could see right through her. At that moment, he touched her face and asked if she was cold outside. Kyra was in shock. He hadn't done anything, but her heart was pounding so hard it was indescribable. This definitely shouldn't be happening. At this point, he apologized, saying that he had touched her without permission. He had no experience with girls, so he didn't know what was allowed and what wasn't. Meanwhile, he was getting redder and redder. Our heroine suddenly asked what she should do. Did he want her to show him her limits? Soon after, she told Palon that he was very different from his everyday self. She was upset when His Highness left her so abruptly at the ceremony. The guy continued to apologize, but he was so embarrassed and red that he didn't even know what to say. Our heroine asked him why he left, and noticing that something was wrong with him, she asked how she felt. The second prince apologized again, and our heroine, looking at him, couldn't understand why his face had turned so red. Was it because of the moonlight? She looked up and noticed that today was a full moon. Perhaps that had some effect on him. One way or another, she was absolutely sure that blushing even on the neck was not normal. At this point, Palon turned away, saying that he was short of breath and his cheeks were red. Apparently, he was very tired and needed rest. The girl asked him if he'd suddenly felt so ill. He told her that he thought it only happened when they were alone. Our heroine immediately asked, surprised, what about dancing at the ball? They even held hands, and he even whispered all sorts of things in her ear. Everything was fine then. Although looking back, she supposed that even then he had been very embarrassed. Apparently, the second prince really only blushes when they are very close. One thought immediately occurred to her. Kara asked the prince point blank if he liked her. The guy said the obvious, surprised, of course. Is it abnormal for a groom to like his bride? Kyra noticed the same clear and cold answer as always. Well, in that case, she most likely misunderstood it. At that moment, she remembered Palon's question, asking what he should do. She told him they should keep a reasonable distance. The guy looked at her in surprise and asked what she meant by the words, reasonable distance. The girl assumed that he wanted to practice, so she moved away a little and told him to come to her, and she would stop him when he got too close. Having taken a step, he did not notice any reaction, so it was logical that he decided to come even closer. After taking a couple more steps, Kara told him in bewilderment that this was too much, because they were literally a couple of centimeters apart. However, Palon looked at Madame de Orche and asked to be allowed to come a little closer. The girl closed her eyes and moved away a little. Palon apologized and said he hadn't meant to scare her. He asked her if he was okay. Looking at him, she was shocked, only thinking about what the answer might be. If only he could see only himself. Palon apologized again and reminded them that Kara had suggested they practice. The girl said that was true, but he seemed to have gotten a little carried away. Who knew the prince was so assertive? The guy said in surprise that he wasn't playing with her, but just he really wanted to get closer. Looking at her, he said he wanted to be the closest person in the world to her. Besides, it would help them squash the breakup rumors, right? The girl said she felt it would be better to develop their relationship more slowly. She didn't want to waste time on empty talk, but she couldn't open up to him right away. The guy then told her he would do everything as he said, so he asked her to explain what else he could do for them. Since he was so insistent, she decided to ask if she could meet His Majesty. Palon asked in surprise if she was talking about the emperor. At that moment, Kara began explaining to him that she wasn't particularly comfortable in her own home. Her father is only affectionate with her when he's around, but in reality, he's a rude and cruel man. He needs his rights as head of the family to stand up to him otherwise. One day she simply won't wake up, and only the emperor can solve her problem. The prince had just started to say something when Melvin turned to His Highness and said that he was urgently called. The guy immediately apologized to the lady and said that he needed to step away for a while. Our heroine didn't even quite understand what had happened. Why did he look upset? The action shifts to the estate where he was thinking about how close he'd been. Just a little more and he would finally, but overall, it's time to get rid of these stupid thoughts. At that moment, Melvin approached him and asked His Highness if he was okay. The guy said he was fine, and then asked what he wanted. Melvin said an urgent message had arrived from Drain Province. A gang had attacked civilians, many of whom were injured. The prince, perplexed, asked again what he'd heard. Then he asked if the victims were receiving assistance. Melvin replied that it was in the process. 2 days had passed since the first attack, but they continued to terrorize the area. The prince decided that a detachment needed to be dispatched immediately, and he would arrive as soon as he received permission. After the prince's order, Melvin bowed to him and said that he would do his best. He understood that he would have to leave the capital for several days to settle this whole misunderstanding. Yet, at that moment, he caught himself imagining her face again. She really did look so frightened and fragile. He needed to apologize. Meanwhile, the fifth prince still couldn't understand why Kara was acting this way towards him. Why was she turning away from him? Why had she changed so drastically without a reason? He decided he needed to find the butler and ask him to call Kara. At that moment, he noticed a couple of guys in front of him discussing something among themselves. He immediately became interested. They were talking about an envoy from the imperial palace, whom everyone seemed to already know about. Rakan immediately realized that Palon would have to leave for a while, which meant everything was going according to plan. While his brother was gone, he would make Kyra his own again. Either way, he was still curious about what had happened. Why were these guys so confused? At that moment, he noticed his brother in front of him and immediately decided that he had come again to take his Kyra. Approaching Palon, he asked his brother if he was all right. The second prince, surprised, asked what had happened. Once again, he saw that arrogant expression. Apparently, he thinks he's better than everyone else. Anyway, he told him they needed to talk. In this case, the guys came to the break room, and Palon immediately suggested that his brother sit down because he needed to return to the castle, which meant they needed to talk about the matter at hand. Rakan asked his brother in surprise what had happened, but Palon offered to talk about him. The guy said he wanted to talk about Kara. He suddenly reminded his brother that he wasn't interested in her. Palon replied that Kyra was his fiancée and future wife, so she was not just interesting to him, but very important to him. However, Rakan, perplexed, told his brother that he had previously said the opposite. Palon looked around and asked in bewilderment if that was all he wanted to tell him. Rakan tried to restrain himself and said that maybe he was crossing the line, but as a friend, she was very dear to him and he wished her true happiness. Palon told his brother not to worry as they weren't planning on breaking off their engagement. Rakan immediately asked why everyone was talking about her. The second prince assured him it was just stupid gossip Rakan still didn't understand and said it was all strange. Why had their relationship changed? Palon laughed and asked if he was really that interested. The guy, of course, said he was very interested. Palon said people change. How can they stay in one place forever? Deciding this answer would satisfy his brother, the boy said it was time to go and left. Rakan immediately hit the table, asking why everyone was putting a spoke in his wheel. He was incredibly angry. He still couldn't understand why Kyra had changed. What was wrong with her? This would definitely ruin all his chances. At that moment, he jumped up and told his assistant to find Kara and tell her to come to him. He would be waiting for her in the break room. The boy immediately ran. Rakan understood that she could ignore a friend's invitation, but not the fifth prince's. He decided to take advantage of his position. After all, if this was the only way, then no big deal. It was high time to bring back the real her. He wouldn't let her change anymore. After some time, our heroine finally came and apologized for the delay. Still, she thought that since the prince had called her, it was Palon too bad. As if reading Kyra's mind, Raken said that his brother had already left, which was why he was calling her. After a moment of silence, the girl asked him, perplexed, what next? Why was he silent? He stood up just then. Soon he began to reach out to her with his hand, and placing it on her head, told the girl that she was very beautiful today. After that, he told Kara that she was more precious to him than anyone else in this world. Kissing her hair, he asked if she understood what he was talking about, but at that moment, our heroine silently knocked his hand away and asked if he was surprised. She told him that someone might misunderstand him if he touched someone's hair. However, the guy asked her in surprise what someone's means if he touches her hair. Looking at her, he said that if she doesn't want to, then he won't do it, but still for him, she is not just someone, but an important person. He also added that her coldness would not change his love. Raken asked her to stop trying so hard for her unfeeling brother and return to him. Looking at her, he said that this was the only reason he had called her here in the first place. Nevertheless, our heroine simply turned around and headed for the exit. The guy suddenly said that since that was her wish, then see you soon. Kyra still couldn't understand why this freak was trying so hard to win his favor. This man is different from the Raken she knew in her past life. She needs to be careful, because something is definitely wrong here. 3 days after the banquet in Vienna's honor, the first snow fell. Fluffy white flakes dusted the garden paths, signaling the arrival of cold weather, but she never liked snow. Her mother died on the day of a heavy snowfall, painlessly in her sleep, without a single word of farewell. And just when she broke up with Palon, and when she left society, and even when she became ill from the poison, all these days it snowed heavily. But today, it didn't seem so terrible to her. Now she understood a little why people enjoyed this time of year. However, at that moment, someone turned to the lady and asked if she was listening. The girl suddenly moved, but didn't even realize where she was. She had literally just been in the garden. By the way, she even felt the cold snowflakes on her hands. It all felt like it was real. At that moment, Vozel turned to Jane and said that if she was feeling down today, she was probably right. He suggested they rest after dinner. Our heroine no less assured him that everything was fine. She was simply lost in her own thoughts. At this point, Andreas turned to his sister and asked what if her trauma was affecting her this way. He explained that he was simply worried about her because the impact from the swing could have been strong and something could have been damaged. The doctor said the first sign of deterioration is a high fever. The wound on her forehead was indeed deeper and wouldn't heal easily. Kyra said she tries to powder it, so it's not noticeable, but she forgot about the treatment. In that case, she said she'll keep an eye on it. In any case, she smiled and asked her younger brother to talk about it later as their dinner was getting cold, and she handed him the fish, and Andreas was surprised that his sister had somehow found out that he liked fish. Anyway, he immediately started eating it, saying that he would eat it with pleasure. The action moves forward a little while, and Her Majesty's personal servant, Audrey Creason, greeted our heroine. The earldom of Creason was one of the great families after the Duchy of Treman that supported the Empress. Although she had many maids, the Empress entrusted important matters only to Countess Creason. She was, one might say, Her Majesty's right hand, and one of those who opposed her engagement to Palon. Anyway, our heroine smiled sweetly at her and said that she was being a bit cold today. She must have been tired from the commute. She asked for some tea. However, at that moment, she was handed a letter, which was an invitation to tea. In the past, the Empress organized a tea party for young aristocrats, but she was not invited. Because of this, rumors of a broken engagement began to spread. Everyone whispered and laughed, saying that Kara was simply ashamed to appear before the Empress. Thus, by not showing up at tea parties, the girl automatically became a social outcast. But she wondered why she'd invited her this time. Apparently, her life was changing after all. Even Her Majesty, who didn't like her, had invited her for tea. In any case, she understood that from now on, she had to analyze every step she took. No one knew what might happen. However, at this point, Audrey screamed in bewilderment and told Mrs. Kara that this letter was not for her, but for Vienna de Orchy. Our heroine was certainly shocked and all, but what did she just say? Not Vienna Trahan, but Vienna de Orch? Audrey immediately began to apologize, saying that it was most likely a mistake. However, our heroine wasn't stupid. Clearly, she did it on purpose. The Empress invited Vienna out of spite, writing their family's name on the invitation. Kyra immediately said that it was rude to call a stranger a family member. Audrey Creason apologized to Lady de Orche and said that she would convey these words to Her Majesty. However, before this, our heroine decided to give a letter to Lady Trehan, so she asked to wait a little. The girl handed the letter to the butler and asked him to give it to Vienna so she could write a reply. The man nodded and took the letter. Soon he left the room, and our heroine was left alone with Audrey Creason. Sometime later, Kyra walked down the corridor, thinking about how events from her past life were repeating themselves. The Empress had invited Vienna, not her. And again, the invitation didn't say Vienna Trahan last time she personally allowed her to join their family at the coming-of-age ceremony, but this time things were different. But why then? Why does the Empress hate her? The girl began to bite her lips. In the past, when Rakan was already preparing to become emperor, she spread rumors about Kyra, and even openly stated that Vienna was more suitable for him. Back then, she did nothing to protect herself, because it was important to her that Rakan ascend to the throne without problems. But this time, she won't turn a blind eye to it. She still has little influence, so it might be useless, but she won't let her pride be hurt anymore, and if she doesn't control her anger, she won't be able to defeat the Empress. She understood that she needed to be thoroughly prepared to leave her unarmed. She didn't want to rely on other people and profit at their expense. In this case, it is very important to become strong now, which means you need to quickly meet with the emperor and take power over the family into your own hands. She urgently needed these rights, both for a retaliatory strike and for settling relations within the estate. Suddenly, Vienna ran up to our heroine and spoke in surprise about the fact that the Empress had invited her to tea. A joyful Vienna showed the letter, and with a smile on her face, asked her sister if she was happy for her. Our heroine smiled and nodded. How could she not be happy for her beloved sister? Kyra told her sister she was going to the palace to meet Prince Rakan. The girl asked in surprise, "Is she really talking about the fifth prince?" Kyra nodded her head, asking Vienna if she really thought the Empress had invited her just like that. The girl also thought there was something to it. In that case, our heroine advised her to write back. Vienna asked again. Our heroine looked at Vienna in surprise and asked what was wrong. The butler should have told her what to write, whether she could come or not in the reply. However, Vienna's previously joyful face changed before our eyes, and Kyra in turn understood perfectly well why she was now so moved. Vienna literally can't write, and what's more, she has terrible handwriting. The girl asked her sister to do this as quickly as possible, because the Empress's personal assistant would be leaving very soon, so there was no point in delaying her. At that moment, Vienna took Kyra's hand and asked her to help her. She invited her sister to come with her. Our heroine, surprised, asked what she was talking about. Vienna suddenly admitted that she couldn't write because she hadn't received a proper education as a child. Kyra pretended to be very surprised, but still asked what she needed to do. The girl asked me to write a letter for the Empress in her stead. Kyra, surprised, asked why. However, the shock was that at that moment the girl bowed before her sister, asking her to help her. Kyra was certainly a little confused. Finally, she asked what she should say. At that moment, the girl handed over the Empress's letter and asked her to look at it herself. As soon as our heroine read it, she was in complete shock. She decided it simply couldn't be true, and soon turned around and ran without even saying a word. However, our heroine suspected something, so she ran somewhere to check. As she began to dig through the pile of letters, she tried to understand whether the handwriting really resembled the Empress's. She soon found one of Prince Rakan's letters and realized that it was written in Rakan's hand. How is this even possible? The girl immediately became thoughtful. Was there something she didn't know about the Empress and Rakan? Following her sister, Vienna knocked on the room and asked in surprise what had happened to her. Having put all the letters in the desk, our heroine sighed and told her sister that she could come in. As soon as the girl entered the room, she began to look around and say how beautiful it was here. Kyra said that this was her mother's room, but nothing could be touched or taken, not by her, not by her father, and definitely not by Vienna. The girl sighed and said she hadn't even asked for anything. Kyra glanced at her and decided to remind her about those curtains, the bed, and even the swing. After all, she wanted the same ones. Kyra told her sister that she understood that she liked her things, but they were her mother's things, so she hoped for understanding. Soon, she sat Vienna down at the table and told her to start writing, and she would help her. Confused, the girl began to say that she had asked her sister to write for her. Kyra snorted and asked her sister in surprise at what point she had agreed to write for her. Vienna, perplexed, asked what Kara was even talking about since she'd said she couldn't write. Was it really that hard to help her? Our heroine laughed to herself, thinking she just needed an excuse to sit her down and make her write. Hayden said she'd help her, but what next? Looking at her, she said that if she became the prince's wife, she would have to write a lot of letters and sign documents. Pointing to her, she said she couldn't ask her for help every time, so she should try. It's hard for everyone at first, but you have to try and keep trying. Vienna slammed the table and jumped up, saying that she would do everything herself and that she didn't need her help. Our heroine smiled and was pleased. In that case, she decided to ask the butler to bring a candle as she would need to put a seal on it. A short time later, Vasil entered the room. Kyra told him that Vienna needed to write a reply, so let them sort it out, and she'd return to the lady. Before leaving, she turned to her sister and asked her not to forget about the pen, ink, and seal, and also it would be better to try not to linger. She also asked for the answer to be delivered to her through the butler. Vienna sighed heavily and said she understood. A short time later, our heroine returned to Audrey and apologized for the long wait. Vienna was delighted with the invitation and was already writing a response. At that moment, a puzzled butler entered the room, apologized to the lady, and said that Lady Trahan had accidentally used her seal. Kyra wasn't the least bit surprised. Of course, she did it by accident, and certainly not because she wanted to be one of the Deorshis. Our heroine couldn't help but giggle. Everything was exactly as she'd imagined. Vienna was like an open book to her. Vasil meanwhile apologized and said Lady Trahan had given him the answer. That way, Kara replied that she had done it on purpose. Most likely, Vienna saw that the invitation read, Vienna de Orshi. In that case, she decided to give the letter to the lady as is. At that moment, the butler reached for the letter. He wanted to say something, but Kara asked him not to worry because she knew what she was doing. Soon, she handed the letter with the answer into the hands of Audrey, who smiled sweetly and thanked Kara. Our heroine, in turn, thought about what she would show, what would happen when someone tries to deceive her. After the Empress's assistant left, Kyra decided to take a walk. She couldn't even remember the last time she'd gone out alone. Anyway, looking at the sun, she thought that it was time to go back since it was setting. Incidentally, looking around, she wondered where she had wandered, apparently too far. The girl decided she had to hurry. No less strange than all this was the fact that there were no people in the area. As she passed through another alley, she wondered how she would ever find her way back. At that moment, she heard someone's footsteps and decided that someone was coming this way. Should she speed up? Since this stranger was already nearby, she decided that the best thing to do would be not to run away, but to hide since there was little time. Soon they died down. The thought immediately began to creep into Kyra's head that it was time to go out. The girl came out from around the corner, but at that moment, someone attacked her and hugged her sharply. The guy continuing to hug the girl asked in bewilderment how she ended up there. Kyra first said Palon scared her, and then only said she'd gone for a walk. Either way, she wondered how he'd found her. The guy said he was very worried and kept calling her name. Didn't she hear him? Kara told him that when she heard footsteps, she got scared and hid. He breathed a sigh of relief, but still asked if she was sure she was okay. Was she in pain? Was she cold? As soon as he heard from Lady Trahan that Kyra had suddenly gone out for a walk alone, he became very worried. In any case, he apologized for scaring her, but he only wanted to make sure she was okay. The girl looked down in embarrassment and said that it was her own fault, and by the way, she was on the contrary, glad that he was here. But why did he decide to meet with her? Palon explained that he had come to deliver a letter to her. She wanted to see His Majesty, didn't she? Looking at this letter, she realized it was written by the Emperor. She didn't expect him to agree at all, but everything was resolved very quickly. Our heroine asked Palon if this was really an invitation. He said it was, and that he'd soon be leaving the capital again. It was precisely because of his departure that the Emperor asked that this letter be urgently delivered into her hands. Kyra smiled, looking at the prince, and told him that he helped her a lot, so she was grateful to him and he could ask her for anything. Soon after these words, Palon admitted that, to be honest, he came not only for this reason. After all, they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and he was beginning to miss her. It was when the opportunity presented itself that he rushed to her side. Looking at her, he said that she was more important to him than anything, which is why he asked her to take his hands and go to the estate before it got dark. After some time, our heroine was sitting in her favorite bathtub and enjoying this pastime. One way or another, she thought about the emperor's letter. The main part of it was clear. He invited her to dinner at the palace, as they would soon become one family. One way or another, the girl understood that she should not give in to emotions under any circumstances. Coming out of the bathroom, she realized that her dinner with the emperor and Vienna tea party with the empress. Dinner will take place just 3 hours before tea, and the place and time are practically the same. However, at that moment, Kara's father literally flew into the room, dissatisfied with something. Looking at his daughter, he asked her in bewilderment how long this would all go on. Vienna ran into the room with a sad face and asked her father to stop shouting because her little sister might misunderstand him. He told his adopted daughter to stop defending her selfish sister because she was too kind. Vienna said Kara was getting ready for bed and they could sort things out later. Our heroine looked at this circus with disapproval, unable to understand what was going on. If these two were going to chat, they shouldn't do it in her room. Kyra decided to call her father and ask why he burst into her room in the middle of the night. The man immediately said he wouldn't mention the rumors circulating about the family because of her behavior. He forgave her when she decided to drop their family name from Vienna. However, he certainly wasn't going to ignore this. Our heroine didn't understand what was going on at all. She couldn't understand whether she really needed to apologize for not taking this snake into the family. Anyway, the girl asked her father what he was talking about. The man was surprised that she asked as if she didn't know herself, and how was she supposed to edit if her head was full of sawdust? He said that the second prince was going to break off the engagement. Vienna immediately began asking her father to stop saying it since her sister didn't like to talk about it. The man snorted and said that if she had been even half as good as Vienna, none of this would have happened. At that moment, the girl began to cry and ask her father to calm down. The man reassured Vienna and said he would sort everything out. He turned to Jane and told her to send his daughter to her room, but the girl stood still and remained silent. The man, perplexed, asked why the hell she wasn't going to listen to the Marquis de Orche's orders. She was a servant, after all. With a heavy sigh, our heroine asked Jane to leave the room, and the man immediately shouted, asking his daughter how dare she interrupt when he was speaking. Our heroine decided to remind her father that Jane was a servant of the palace. If the engagement were broken, she would be the first to return to the palace. The man, perplexed, asked his daughter if this was really her only excuse, that some girl would be the first to return to the palace. Kyra continued to watch calmly and said that she used Jane as an example so that he would understand that she would not be here anymore. In any case, she turned to the girl and asked her to go, and they would sort it out themselves. The girl nodded and headed for the exit. At this moment, Andreas decided to come to the screams in the middle of the night and perplexed asked his uncle what was going on. They all turned and asked Andreas why he had come here. He needed to talk to his daughter alone. The boy explained that he only came there because he heard screams. He apologized for what his sister had done, as she hadn't meant it out of malice. The head of the de Orche family, at that very moment, asked his son in bewilderment what he was talking about. The boy fell to his knees and began to apologize. Vienna liked something Kara's sister had given her and decided to borrow it, but don't consider that stealing. Our heroine, perplexed, asked what it meant that Vienna had stolen her thing. Nevertheless, the boy said he'd asked the maid to bring it. Vienna, perplexed, asked what her brother was doing. Just at that moment, the maid knocked on the door and said that she had brought what she had asked for. Vienna immediately smiled and headed for the door, saying that there was some kind of mistake here, so she would sort it out now. Our heroine grabbed her hand and said that if it was a mistake, then she should know it too. Soon after, she turned around and asked the maid to come inside. At that moment, the maid approached Miss Vienna and handed her what she had asked to be brought. Our heroine, noticing the box, immediately realized it belonged to her mother. Why did Vienna have it? Kyra walked over and snatched the box. The maid, perplexed, began to say that it belonged to Miss Vienna, so she should return it. She ignored the maid and asked her sister how she would explain what supposedly her thing was doing in her possession. At that moment, my father snatched the box, saying it was most likely some kind of misunderstanding. Why steal Vienna at all? Our heroine decided to remind them that if they don't know, the pattern on this box is the symbol of the kingdom of Riesel. The man, perplexed, said she might have given it to her sister and forgotten about it. Vienna chimed in saying she often did that. Inside was a hair clip her sister had never worn. Our heroine laughed, but apparently Vienna was lying too much when she said that there was a hairpin inside this box. At that very moment, she snatched the box and said that there was a brooch inside. It could indeed be mistaken for a hair clip, but just press lightly on it, and a hidden pin will pop off. Kyra guessed Vienna was about to insert the brooch into her hair. Now let's see how she does it without getting hurt. She immediately turned to her younger brother and asked him not to stand there like a pillar, but to call a doctor instead. The guy said that he would call him right away, and soon Kara turned to the maid. She told her to bring some ointment in case something happened, because they didn't know. The girl, shocked, said she'd do it right away. Kyra said that she usually agrees with her father on everything and never argues, but this is her late mother's decoration. Doesn't he agree? He started saying that there was no point in talking about it now, because it was she who hadn't been able to keep track of her thing properly. Our heroine screamed angrily and asked if it was really she who had failed to keep an eye on her thing. The man said that this was indeed the case, because if it were otherwise, how would Vienna have ended up with this thing? In that case, the girl decided she had no choice but to check the magic box and find out who was lying. Since it is the property of the Riesel Kingdom, it has been given anti-theft magic. The most interesting thing was that if someone opened it without the owner's permission, his image would be imprinted. The girl, seeing her portrait, began to cry and ask for forgiveness, saying that this thing looked so beautiful and she… The man once again stood up for his daughter, saying that she did not do it intentionally and that she already feels awkward about the situation. Our heroine sighed heavily and told her sister to leave the room because she needed to talk to her father. As soon as the girl left the room, the Marquis de Orsha suddenly began to shout and say that Kyra had deliberately forced her sister to do this and showed the box. Kyra was shocked, but told her father that he could think whatever he wanted, but she was going to do everything she could for her anyway. The man, perplexed, asked her why, and the girl said she felt sorry for her. Her father was dead. Her mother was dying. Didn't he think she was practically an orphan? The man immediately screamed in confusion and asked which orphan they were talking about, because she had him. He was her father. Our heroine screamed back and reminded him that he was her father, not hers. Vienna was his niece, not part of their family. At that moment, he walked out and slammed the door, asking how much longer Kara would spout nonsense right in his face. He didn't even want to hear it. So the action shifts to the next day. Madame de Orche received an invitation from Countess Harpon. Our heroine asked for a letter. He gave it to her, but something was wrong with it. Kara asked the butler what was wrong. The man was silent for a moment, then said that the Marquise had chosen a new butler, as before. Anyway, Kyra said it was for the best, and then told him to follow her lead. Then she asked, what about the people in the kitchen? Were they new too? The man said that it seemed that the food from the new cooks was not to the Marquise's taste. Although he sent those cooks away, he is most likely still looking for new staff, and he also said that he will fire everyone as soon as he finds the right people. Kyra listened to all this news in bewilderment, but was glad that she had managed to pass on the note to Soren through Jane. A quote from a letter to Soren. The girl mentioned that her father is a very picky eater, so if the new staff cooks for him, they should add lanthanum powder. Lantana is a plant that causes vomiting when ingested. As soon as he and Vienna taste these culinary masterpieces, they all know what will happen to them. She won't let him take advantage of her position. Incidentally, she thought her father would visit her after what happened, but everything was quiet. Perhaps a meeting of the vassals was imminent. The vassals' meeting must be held at the highest level. It's a kind of gratitude from his father for allowing him to inherit the title of Marquise. Usually only Viscount Austen and the butler are with him, but this time Vaucel is on her side. She immediately decided that in that case, he should be caught for embezzling the family budget. She had to be there to see that pathetic face. Already at dinner, the man asked his daughter in bewilderment whether she was really not going to say hello to her father. The girl asked what was the point if he wasn't going to listen to her. At that moment, the butler served her food, for which she thanked him. It was only at this moment that the Marquis de Orche hit the table because his nerves were at their limit. Andreas cried out in bewilderment. The man continued talking, asking how much longer this could be tolerated. He asked to see Vienna and asked why she wasn't as well-mannered. Our heroine burned her hands and couldn't understand whether it was really her fault that he spilled hot soup on her, even though he never cared that she was in pain. Andreas told his father that if he continued to speak like that, his little sister might misunderstand him. The butler looked at the lady in horror and pointed out to her that her hands were all burned, so he was calling a doctor's. However, our heroine said that everything was fine and that there was no need to do it. Her father's whole appearance shows how undeserving he is of his position given his barbaric behavior. At this moment, the man was still unable to contain his emotions, and so he swung his hand to hit his daughter. Our heroine closed her eyes and heard a distinct pop, but did not understand why she did not feel pain. Opening her eyes, she noticed her younger brother standing up to defend his sister. Our heroine immediately started asking him if everything was okay. He said he was. In any case, she asked the butler to bring the first aid kit. She didn't mind getting slapped at all, as she could use it against him later, but she didn't know that Andreas would stand up for her. Did he really mean to hit her with such force? At that moment, the new butler turned to Vossel and told him that he was in charge now, and there was no need to call a doctor. Our heroine started crying and saying she didn't understand what was wrong with him. Why fire people who had served faithfully for so many years, who were willing to give their lives? She began to say that they always followed his orders, knowing that they could suffer dire consequences because of them. He was a marquis after all. The man said he didn't understand what she was talking about, and the girl said she couldn't ignore it anymore. The girl said she knew he had oiled the swing, so she would fall off it. She knows Vienna asked him to swing her harder, so she would fall and hurt herself too. Afterwards, he specifically informed the fifth prince of this. He told him to meet Vienna, not her. Is it because he doesn't like the idea of them being close? Because a daughter like Vienna is more suited to him? The man began to defend himself, saying that it was all nonsense. After all, she herself wanted to date the prince. However, Kyra asked if he really thought it was her desire and not an unconscious state. Vienna, perplexed, asked what unconsciously meant. After all, she'd been told she'd only suffered a minor injury. The man began to try to calm them down, saying that the wound had almost healed, so there was nothing to worry about. Revived our heroine, understood why she'd fallen. He'd always wanted Vienna to become close to the fifth prince. This is literally the man who, to achieve his goal, is willing to harm his own daughter. Showing her wound, she asked if that meant healed. This was her last chance before the meeting of the vassals to win over as many people as possible to her side. Now, everyone in the estate, seeing the scars where he tried to hit her, would understand that she was just the unfortunate daughter of a terrible father. Fortunately, he did everything as she wanted. The people around began to whisper in confusion, talking about the deep wound on Kara's head. Our heroine only thought that this was the right reaction, the one she'd been waiting for. If only they knew how much she'd suffered and hadn't used holy water for this moment. With tears in her eyes, the girl asked her father if she was really his daughter. Looking at the Marquis's angry face, the girl watched to see how he would get out of this situation. He cried out in bewilderment, saying that so much time had passed and that nothing had been visible at the Vienna ceremony. She'd gotten hurt and was trying to blame him. Our heroine clutched her head and asked her father if he really thought his daughter was that bad. She admitted that she had simply covered her wound with her hair to avoid his righteous anger. Looking at her father, she asked what he had done on his end. Kyra continued to cry, saying it was too much even for him, but fine, let him spread rumors throughout the estate that she didn't do anything replacing the butler, who served her faithfully and truthfully. Andreas looked at his father in bewilderment and asked if what his sister was saying was true. The man immediately asked his youngest son what kind of nonsense he was talking. The servants' contracts were coming to an end, so he decided to replace them. Kyra started screaming, asking if he really thought she didn't know. It was because of Vossel, who told him he wouldn't cover for him anymore. Looking at the butler, the Marquis cried out in bewilderment and asked if he really had said that. In that case, he should have been thrown out long ago. Kyra continued to cry and tell her father to stop because the butler had done nothing wrong, and she was just waiting for his answer. Was she really his daughter? The man looked at his daughter in bewilderment and asked what kind of strange questions she was asking. In that case, Kyra decided it wasn't true. After all, he always trusted Vienna, not her. Even the butler was worried about her. He hadn't dared tell her he was leaving until the very moment he left. People began whispering, saying that Miss Vienna knew the lady was so traumatized. How could anyone not know such horrors? It's scary to imagine what they could do to them. Our village was only happy about all these rumors, but the Marquise d'Orche turned to the people and ordered them to stop making noise. Andreas approached his older sister and asked if she was okay. Regardless, he advised her to go to her room and rest. The girl smiled and told him that he was right, so they should leave there. Finally, the girl asked Soren not to be disturbed until she sent the servant herself. After some time, our heroine asked one of the maids if she had found what she had been asked for. The girl handed over a notebook. Kyra had even prepared fabricated evidence and hidden it in a safe place. Now it was all over. Everyone saw how terrible her father was, which meant she could breathe a sigh of relief. The girl also decided that it was time to finally use holy water to heal her wound. The very next day, she had to go to Countess Harpan for tea. Who knew their meeting would happen so quickly? The only thing that made her happy was that she'd managed to make such a strong ally. After some time, our heroine finally arrived at the meeting place, and Countess Harpan called out to her. Kyra smiled and told the Countess she was glad to meet her. She also thanked her for the invitation. Soon she began to look around, and only talked about how exquisite this place was. The woman smiled shyly and said that if she had known she would receive praise, she would have tried even harder. One way or another, she decided to introduce her close friends, so she pointed to the girls sitting next to her. At that moment, she pointed to Countess Creason and said that there was a special person there for her. Our heroine, as soon as she saw the Countess, could not understand why the Queen's close friend would come here. Anyway, she greeted Lady Creason shyly, saying she'd been gazing at her beauty. She was pleased to meet her, so she introduced herself. The girl said she was glad to meet him and had heard about it from her daughter. In any case, it had been fun today, so she hoped to see him again very soon. Soon everyone left, but only Countess Creason remained, and our heroine, whom the Countess asked to stay for a while. The woman smiled and told her she was nothing like what they said. Kara replied that she didn't even know how to respond, as she had no idea what the rumors were about. Lady Creason apologized and said she had meant that she was not at all what her daughter had described to her. Kyra smiled at the woman and said she could tell it like it was. There was no one here anyway. The woman suddenly asked if Kyra knew why she was there. Our heroine, surprised, told her that only she could know about it. She was simply very curious why she wanted to meet her. Lady Creason is, after all, much closer to the Empress than any other servant. Why would she come to Countess Harpan's tea party? The woman at that moment said that she was simply curious and wanted to see Kara with her own eyes. The girl, surprised, asked the Countess if she was convinced of her thoughts. Miss Creason nodded and said it was good that they had met today. They soon parted ways, and Countess Harpan asked them to wait so she could give them a gift. She truly cares about her people, and what's more, she even wrote a letter. She apologized for the unexpected guest's appearance. She herself was surprised by the guest's appearance, as she hadn't sent an invitation. In any case, she would explain everything next time. Our heroine herself realized it was truly odd for Lady Creason to show up at Countess Harpan's tea party. Had the Empress herself sent her? One way or another, there might be some secret connection between the Countess and the lady, so it was necessary to keep an eye on them. The carriage stopped unexpectedly, which surprised Kara. Had she been so lost in thought that she hadn't noticed they'd arrived? Our heroine, perplexed, asked the reason for the stop when suddenly someone opened the carriage door. A moment later, Prince Raken appeared inside, asking for forgiveness for the intrusion. He justified his actions by saying that she did not respond to his messages, and he had to resort to such extreme measures. At that moment, he closed the door, which surprised the girl. Looking at Rakan, she asked him why he was looking at her so strangely. A moment later, he touched her hair, then pulled one strand behind her ear. Soon he took another strand of hair, but a different one, and kissed it, telling Kara that she seemed completely different lately. Looking at her, he said that everything seemed as if she was confidently moving towards some goal. Only now he noticed that because of this goal, she was destroying relationships with her loved ones by committing strange actions. The guy suddenly smiled and told her that it looked as if she had already been through all this once. Although our heroine was shocked by these words, she decided not to show it, so she coldly asked him where he got that from. Raken said that before he knew what she was thinking, but now he understands absolutely nothing. The girl moved away from him and said that she had absolutely nothing to hide. She simply acted and thought as she felt in her heart. At that very moment, the guy hugged his beloved and asked her if she loved him back. The girl pushed him away and, smiling, said that it was true she loved him. In that case, Raken, perplexed, asked her why she'd given the clothes he'd sent to someone else. Why had she paired him with this low-born woman? She even gave the flowers she sent as an apology to her sister. Why? Our heroine pretended not to understand what he was talking about and asked what flowers he was talking about. The guy said he'd sent a box on the day of the tea party. Kyra cried out in bewilderment, asking if this was really for her. She'd been so envious of Vienna. However, in that case, she did not understand why her sister had said nothing at all, since these flowers were meant for her. Raken even flinched a little as soon as he heard these words. Had Trahan really done that? Our heroine somehow felt that he suspected something, despite her delightful performance. At that moment, the guy apologized to Kyra. After all, she was his brother's fiancée, and he understood perfectly well that they couldn't be together. Nevertheless, taking her hand, he asked, what if he could resolve everything and change it to his advantage? Would she look at him? Our heroine, knowing the future and analyzing the present, couldn't understand what was happening. How could she have ever believed such empty saccharine words? In any case, she genuinely wonders why he's saying all this. When she looked into their relationship, she realized they really were good friends at first. The girl understood that Raken absolutely did not love her, but then why was he saying all these empty words? Looking at those puppy dog eyes, as he looked at his so-called beloved, she knew that in the end, he would choose the Vienna snake. The girl suddenly told him that she really liked him, and that she was very sorry that they couldn't be together, but it was still worth stopping. Rakan continued to tell Kara that these weren't just empty words. After all, he swore he wouldn't leave her alone. She immediately remembered the promise he'd made to her when he'd assumed his princely rights. He'd given what was known as a gentleman's word. Funny. Our heroine told him that such words and promises were impossible to forget. His words filled her with hope. True, he not only kept his promise, but also took advantage of it. Raken approached the girl and soon noticed her tears. Should he get closer? Why was she crying? He decided to tell her he loved her and wanted to know if their feelings were mutual. Meanwhile, Kara was thinking about how hard she'd bitten her cheek to make the tears come. She wished this performance would end soon. The girl begged the prince not to suffer because she wanted him to be happy. No matter who was by his side, she would support him. One way or another, she needed to think about it. The guy asked me not to say that he didn't want to accept that answer because he wanted to hear the truth, but Kyra asked the prince to leave because she needed time. Could he understand that at this moment? Raken asked her a counter-question. What about her? Did she understand what he meant? Our heroine said she understood, and therefore asked him to leave. The prince suddenly shouted, saying that everything was wrong. He just wanted to say that. Our heroine once again shut his highness's mouth and said that time was up. They had to go. At that moment, he grabbed her face and turned to her. Kara, perplexed, began to wonder what this weirdo was up to. Soon he began to reach out to her, with his lips, thinking that in this way, he could resolve their current situation. Nevertheless, our heroine began to turn away from him with all her might, making it clear that she did not want this. The guy, perplexed, asked her if she was really scared too, which she nodded and asked who wouldn't be taken aback in her place. Why so suddenly? She could only think to herself how much this jerk irritated her. She told him again that she needed time. The fifth prince smiled one last time and told his beloved Kyra that she was very beautiful. He wanted to kiss her to prove his feelings. Funny, does the fact that she's beautiful really give him the right to force himself on her? At that moment, Rakan asked the girl if she wanted it. At that moment, His Highness began to be called, saying it was time to go. The girl told him he had business to attend to, so he should go. Rakan finally leaned over to Kara and asked if they'd cleared up all their misunderstandings. Our heroine asked what misunderstandings they were talking about. The guy took one look at Kara and told her he wasn't interested in Vienna Trahan at all. She was just her relative, that's all. There was no need to try to set him up with her in the future. He smiled and said he loved only her. She truly was the most beautiful girl in the empire, and he was holding himself back from running to her with kisses. In any case, he opened the carriage door and said that it was time for him to go, but she should remember that, from today on, no one else should touch even the tips of her fingers with their lips. Soon the carriage pulled away, and our heroine couldn't understand what the hell was going on. What did it mean to not kiss others? She'd never kissed anyone before. In the past, despite all her efforts, Rakan only honored her with a fleeting kiss on the cheek, but this time, she noticed the guy was trying something new, but she couldn't figure out what he was trying to achieve. Why did he need her so badly? At that moment, our heroine remembered the evening when Kyra and Palon went out onto the balcony. Did Rakan really think they'd kissed? However, there was no one else there, so how could Rakan know this? In any case, she soon arrived back home and was met by the butler. He said that while she was away, a meeting had been held, and the documents she had requested had been carefully checked. The girl asked him what had happened. In the end, Vassal told her that they had confirmed his suspension from public office for 3 months. Of course, this was wonderful, because removal from state affairs was indeed an excellent punishment for her father. Kyra turned to the butler and said that she hoped he did not feel guilty, because it was a natural result. Ultimately, our heroine's father's removal has proven to be the greatest benefit, as she is now in charge of the estate's financial affairs, meaning it's time to gain full rights. In any case, the girl noticed that the house was somehow quiet. Fortunately, she could now breathe a sigh of relief. She felt much better, having given up her dream of being her father's favorite. Eventually, time flew by, and the day of her meeting with the emperor arrived. Also today was the day when Vienna would attend the empress's tea party, and she would take back what was rightfully hers. Suddenly, Kyra noticed a strange commotion near the carriage. Vienna was arguing with the butler. Vienna was perplexed when she said that she was going to the empress. So why on earth was her sister taking the carriage? The man replied that Lady Kyra also had business. She was heading to the palace. The girl, perplexed, asked the butler if he was deaf, since she was the one riding, not Kara. At that moment, our heroine approached her sister and asked if she was already on her way. Vienna assumed her sister had come out to see her off. In any case, she was sorry she didn't have an invitation, so she wouldn't be able to enter the palace. Our heroine found it funny to watch her sister's arrogance. Just imagine she'd be proud of an invitation to a tea party attended by upper-class girls. It was just perfect, so it's good that Vienna continues. At that moment, Kyra told her sister that she would be happy to see her off, but what a pity she was very busy today. After that, she turned to Jane and said that it was time for them to go, so they needed to get into the carriage. As soon as Kyra stepped into the carriage, her sister asked her in confusion where she was going. The girl told her sister she'd tell her everything as soon as she arrived, and as for her, have a nice tea. After some time, our heroine arrived at the palace, where Pelon met her at the entrance. The girl thanked him for coming out to meet her. Pelon replied that it was nothing, since he had promised her. As soon as she stepped out of the carriage, the girl immediately felt eyes fixed on her. It was obvious these people were spying on her. It's logical that all these jackals still suspected something imperial law limited the women who could become empresses. They should all be marquises and above, and every aristocrat should become a concubine, but not everyone should become a queen. Among all of them, only Kyra is free, and in such a status, which means that no matter what she does, she will remain in her place. At that moment, the girl turned to Pelon and asked if he knew why she had made an appointment with the emperor. The guy looked at her and assumed it was because of the transfer of rights. The girl was shocked that he knew everything, but still helped her cope with this matter. Pelon answered her and reminded her of the promise he had made. Kyra remembered it at that moment. However, it was more like a deal than a promise. At that moment, the guy said that her rights should be transferred to her as soon as she reached adulthood. The only delay was due to their engagement. Either way, Kyra was only thinking that if it weren't for Pelon, she wouldn't have been able to make it all this way. When he's around, she feels safe. That is why the girl smiled, looking at him, and thanked him with all her heart. The action soon shifts to the palace, to the dining room, where there were 4 chairs. Our heroine was surprised by this. The girl immediately asked who would be with them. At that moment, the Empire's star, the second prince, was introduced. At that moment, our heroine turned around and noticed Lady Philippa Kinsella in front of her, who was glad to meet Lady Orshi. According to rumors, she is responsible for the Empire's economy and holds financial control in her own hands. Kyra greeted the girl and said that she didn't even expect to see her here, but she was also very glad to meet them. Philippa Kinsella smiled, but covered her face with her fan, saying that she was also glad to see her, because she wanted to visit her. She was about to report to His Majesty, but heard he was having dinner with Kyra Orshi. She apologized to the second prince for the intrusion. Pelon said everything was fine and invited her to sit down. Then Philippa Kinsella sat down and told Lady Orshi that her mother had been a wonderful person. She even admitted that she wanted to be like her, but it was a shame their lives were so fragile. After her husband's death, she thought she would be thrown out of the family despite her pregnancy. One way or another, even after the birth of her son, it was her mother who helped her obtain a title for him. Our heroine was very surprised by this because she did not remember her mother being interested in other people's affairs, and besides, she was often sick and rarely left the house. I wonder why she helped them then. Was she afraid that after Kara's death, she would find herself in the same situation? And at that moment, the girl realized why Lady Philippa was there. She knew who exactly had helped her son and was now going to help her gain her title. Meanwhile, Philippa Kinsella said that her son is already 12 years old and will soon come into his own thanks to his mother Kara. At that moment, His Majesty entered the room, which the knights immediately said, "The great son Legret." His Majesty, the Emperor, smiled as he looked at Kara and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Deciding not to beat around the bush, he decided to ask the girl what exactly she wanted to talk about. It was better to settle everything now and then eat. Our heroine told him she wanted to receive her title by right of inheritance. Then she handed him the letter her mother had left before her death. She admitted that she had not known about the letter for a long time since her father had hidden it from her. In any case, Kyra said the emperor had likely heard about his dismissal. She decided to show him everything and tell him everything in advance. Incidentally, the letter was officially certified. Palon said at this point that Lady Orshi should have taken over her rights 2 years ago. Our heroine confirmed his words, but said that she did not blame anyone for this, because that's how it happened. Philippa Canzella suddenly said in surprise that they had most likely discussed it among themselves, and that was why they were so calm. Nevertheless, the emperor said that if they had both decided on this, then he thought it was being done as a protest. Could it be because he wanted to break off their engagement? Our heroine, perplexed, asked the emperor if he really wanted this. The man, confused, began to say that it wasn't true. He just wanted them to get married sooner, but everything was dragging on and… At that moment, our heroine replied that she knew everything. After all, a lot of time had passed, and a lot had changed in her family, so she wanted to end things. Kyra, Orche Marquise, by hereditary blood, asks His Majesty to transfer to her legal rights. Before that, he said he needed to ask her something. He wanted to know if it would change the status of her engagement to the prince. The girl said that this would not affect her engagement in any way, since she herself wanted it. In that case, the emperor said he saw no reason to oppose this desire. He snapped his fingers and asked his servant to summon the official. Flash forward to 2 hours later at the Orshi estate. Vienna was furious that her sister had taken their family's carriage and left. In that case, she looked around, and noticing some carriage said that she would ride in this one. The people looked at her in bewilderment, and the girl replied that her father was sick and her sister was not at home, so while they were away, she was the mistress here. However, at that moment, the butler approached and told the girl that this was the mistress's personal carriage and no one else had the right to use it. Vienna snorted and asked what he was even talking about. He always follows Kara around, so doesn't he know? She decided to recall the words of her sister, who said that she did not feel sorry for anything for her. So what kind of nonsense is this? The man still stood his ground and said again that only the mistress could use this carriage, so she should choose another carriage. Vienna even started laughing, asking the butler how much he disliked her. The man wanted to say that this was not the case at all, when suddenly Vienna screamed. She told him to stop talking nonsense and save his speeches for others. She's going to the castle right now. Vassal wanted to warn her about what would happen if she went to the castle, but the girl only laughed and got into the carriage. Soon, she left the estate. One of the knights ran up to the butler, asking if he was okay. The young man immediately noticed they were in trouble since Miss Kara had gone in the carriage. He, perplexed, said it was His Majesty's engagement gift, and the butler in turn said they needed to warn the lady he would write a letter, but who would deliver it? The action shifts back to the emperor's palace. Palon is approached by his assistant, who is conveying some information. The boy handed over a letter and said it came from the De Orshi estate, sent by the butler. Kara was a little surprised. The man spoke of a disaster Vienna had left in the Kara carriage, a gift from His Majesty. The girl hadn't listened to him, despite all his warnings. He expected His Majesty to be angry, so he asked Vienna to meet him. Our heroine asked when the letter had arrived, but her sister did everything as expected. Melvin replied that it took about an hour before it reached his hands. In this case, our heroine realized that it came just when she was at dinner with His Majesty. The girl got up from the table, and Palon took her hand and asked in surprise what had happened. The girl turned around and said that Vienna had caused trouble again, so it needed to be checked. Soon after, he glanced at the letter and was shocked. Could it really be true? Kara had told him that Vassal wouldn't have written something like that without a reason. After some time, the guys went outside to meet Vienna. Meanwhile, someone was scolding the girl who was in tears. Of course, our heroine noticed. With a heavy sigh, our heroine began to apologize to Palon, as she had not meant to dispose of His Majesty's gift in this way. She understood that she should have kept a better eye on him, so she asked him to forgive her sister. The guy told his fiancée not to say stupid things, because he had no desire to punish her. But nevertheless, he looked at the girl and said that he would like to warn her. The girl lowered her head guiltily and said that she understood His Highness. He asked her to look at how Kara had to suffer because of her actions. Vienna turned her gaze to her sister and began to apologize to her, saying that she didn't mean it. Nevertheless, after this, Palon placed the cape on Kyra. Meanwhile, she was thinking that everything was going according to plan. She knew Vienna would ride in this carriage. Of course, she didn't know how long the girl had been arguing with the knights of the imperial palace, but at least 10 other carriages had passed by them. In society, your reputation can crack in an instant like thin ice. And the funniest thing is that it doesn't matter that the title of Marquise is rightfully hers if it was not officially awarded. Everyone around her wants her to fall. They will all gossip and say bad things about her, despite all the good things she does. However, when the people in the palace see the noise Vienna has made and how inappropriately she is behaving, and her who is so zealously defending her sister, they will definitely pounce on her with sympathy. Unfortunately, the battle for the title is not without casualties, so she needs to attack first. In just a week, this situation will be forgotten, but her kind attitude and title will remain in everyone's memory. The girl knew for herself that she needed to strengthen the position of the Marquise, and was there a better way? At that moment, Kara turned to Palon and thanked him for his understanding. Of course, there were still tears in her eyes. The guy hugged her to calm her down, and at the same time told her that everything was fine. In any case, he ordered the door to the carriage to be opened, and from now on, it was to be opened only for Lady Kyra de Orshi. The knight of the imperial palace stood up at attention and told His Highness that he understood everything. Vienna at this point looked at them in bewilderment and said that she also needed to get inside. Palon turned and looked at the girl with disdain. He decided to reiterate that this gift was only for Kara and that only she could ride in this carriage. Our heroine, however, still maintained her status as a good sister, so she asked that a carriage be sent for Vienna, as well as she would be late for tea. Palon was beside himself with anger, but still said that he would fulfill Kyra's request if she so desired. Kara once again thanked her groom and asked him to wait so she could say a few words to her sister. The girl smiled and said that they would send a carriage for her, so she needed to wait here for a little while. She also told her sister that she had requested a knight and a maid to help her navigate the palace. Vienna bit her lip and said she understood. Kyra looked at the knight and the maid and asked them to take good care of her sister. The guy happily told Lady Orsh that everything would be done, and now he was closing the door. A short time later, the carriage set off, and Kyra thought everything was perfect. She'd received a title from His Majesty and enhanced her reputation thanks to Vienna. In any case, all she could do was wait for the reaction of the people who saw all of this. Looking at the palace, she caught herself thinking that the palace, which she had seen so many times in her past life, seemed to have always been so beautiful. I wonder if I should thank the poison that killed her body and allowed her to live a second life. What else could one dream of but sweet revenge? Nevertheless, our heroine began to wonder, could she really change this life? In any case, she threw her head back and decided that when it was all over, maybe she would still try to live this life for itself. At that moment, the girl felt a sharp pain. Looking at her legs, she assumed she had run too fast and was probably bleeding. After a few seconds, Palon handed her a handkerchief, asking Kira if she was hurt. Soon he turned around, saying that he would not look and that she could examine herself for now. The girl noticed Palon blushing again. Why was he so red? Or conversely, what was wrong with her? Why did she find the prince so cute? Either way, she decided the headscarf certainly wouldn't help in her case. Soon she raised her head and noticed Palon's gaze. She reminded him that he'd promised not to look. He apologized and said he'd thought she was in pain, so he'd turned around. He didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable, so he promises that she won't be hurt because of him in the future. Our heroine was surprised that Palon was taking responsibility for the wounds on her legs. After some time, they arrived, and Palon offered to carry the bride, since it would be better for her not to move unnecessarily. The girl started making excuses and saying that everything was fine. She could go herself. Palon, however, decided not to listen to her and immediately picked her up. He asked her to be patient for a moment while he carried her. Kyra wanted to say that there were a lot of people in the castle, but the second prince interrupted her and asked her to pretend that she had lost consciousness. A moment later, they passed the butlers. Palon asked them to call a doctor, as Lady Orsh was ill. After some time, Palon finally brought the girl to the estate, and what's more, they bandaged her leg. Jane, perplexed, rushed into the room and asked the lady how this had happened. Our heroine told her everything was fine, since the wound was minor. However, Jane said that if she had known this would happen, she would have accompanied hers. Kyra again asked her not to worry, Since she herself had insisted on taking a day off, the girl examined her mistress's leg for a moment longer, but soon our heroine said it was time to go. Jane asked Kara if she was finished with her business. Kyra smiled and told her that, luckily, she was done with work for the day. The very next day, the girl had to ride in a carriage again. She couldn't understand why Palon accompanied her everywhere. It felt so strange to be here alone with him, and his words about responsibility were stuck in her head. In any case, she decided she wanted to open the window. At that moment, Palon asked her how she was feeling. She paused, then said she felt a tightening in her chest and felt like her keyboard was lifting. Touching her head, he asked in surprise where and what hurt. Kyra blushed and said that wasn't really the reason, she was just embarrassed by his words. Palon laughed and asked in bewilderment if he was really the cause of her poor health. Our heroine answered him that another groom would simply send his bride away with a couple of nights, but he really is not like the others. She also said that he was sweetly worried about the blisters on her feet, as if she had been seriously injured. Besides, the word responsibility confuses her. He says things like that out of the blue, and that's why she can't understand. Is it really that easy for him? The guy said that it was not difficult for him to take responsibility, so he said so. Our heroine wanted to say something else, but Palon interrupted her and reminded her that she would soon become his wife, so he should think about her. Kyra in turn reminded him that they had a regular deal, so he didn't need to try so hard. Hearing this word, the guy's face instantly changed, and it was obvious that it offended him. The girl in any case said that what they had agreed on would be enough for her. She decided to reiterate the plan. She would take back her rights to the family and help him ascend to the throne. Palon squeezed his leg and said he remembered, but still she was officially his fiancée, and he had responsibilities. That didn't mean he could completely eliminate emotion from their relationship. She is his future wife, the only woman he will spend his entire life with. This is more important to him than their agreement. Kyra said she understood what he was talking about, but their wedding was not happening anytime soon. Looking down, she suggested that he think about the present, because right now the most important thing for her was to sort out her title and her home. Palon's expression sank even further, and he apologized for not helping her with this sooner. Kyra was perplexed and said that it was none of his business, but he apologized anyway, saying that if he had the status of crown prince, the family would treat her better. Kyra laughed and said that in the future they would solve problems together. After all, they had a common goal and they would achieve it. The guy once again blushed in all possible places and whispered, "Together." The girl breathed a sigh of relief and noticed that he smiled, so she assumed he might answer her question. His Majesty very quickly agreed to grant her the rights of head of the family. Is there any other reason for this? The young man said that the emperor most likely simply wanted to keep his word to the late marquise, her mother and her supporters. That's why he agreed so easily. Kyra was glad that she got what she wanted anyway, so there was no need to look for pitfalls. Vasil, Henny, Soren, they will all be happy to hear this news. At that moment, Palon pulled her out of her thoughts. Asking her in surprise what she was thinking about, the girl suddenly noticed that the prince seemed to have brightened up. Suddenly, she stared at him, trying to figure out if his eyes had always been this color, so golden and deep. Had they always been so beautiful? She touched his face and said that the royal family members had very beautiful eyes, so she just wanted to take a closer look at them. She was shocked even by the fact that she had touched his face. Nevertheless, Palon took her hand and pulled her toward him. Looking at her, he became a little lost in thought. Kyra asked him what was wrong, to which he replied that her eyes were beautiful. Our heroine thanked him for the compliment, but still asked him to give her her hand because she was sweaty. The guy sheepishly apologized and said that she was so beautiful that he accidentally took her hand. At that very moment, he realized what he had just said, so he blushed and began to think about what had just happened. However, looking at Kyra, who was thanking him for the compliment, he decided that everything was fine. It was good that she wasn't offended and simply took his strange words as a compliment. He breathed a sigh of relief. However, our heroine sat there, embarrassed, not understanding why Palon was saying such strange things. Her heart was beating incredibly hard, and she calmed herself down by saying that these were just words that had no meaning. At that moment, she looked at him and said she wanted to ask him something. His eyes were a deep gold, but then why were his relatives' eyes different? The members of the royal family stood out with their dark black eyes, which looked as if they had been dusted with golden powder. Each of them had a different degree of gold and black coverage. For example, the emperor's eye was covered in gold, occupying a third of his eye. The third prince had a quarter of gold, and the fourth prince's gold tint was almost invisible unless you looked him straight in the eye. At that moment, he asked in surprise if she didn't like it. She told him that wasn't true. She was just curious. In that case, he said he wasn't sure what the reason was, but Melvin said the golden tint of the eye showed how skillfully the prince would wield the sword. The girl thought this was quite interesting. After all, Palon really was the best at fencing. Our heroine at that moment realized that the color gold signifies the level of fencing, and then it means that the color black. Palon then pointed out that the color black, according to Melvin, indicates mana level, so it's clear that he's most likely the one who wields magic most effectively. Kyra immediately understood who they were talking about, because that impudent figure immediately appeared in her mind's eye. The second prince was talking about his brother Rekes. In his past life, the fourth prince was considered the best wizard, so there was no point in him pretending to be such a useless prince. But what then? The girl said outright that she'd never seen the fifth prince use magic, even though he'd fooled her and pretended to love her. She understood that he could just as easily pretend he had no strength. Nevertheless, Palon urged his fiancée to calm down, as this was merely an assumption. In any case, even if it is true, sometimes there are things that you don't want to show to others. Kyra immediately analyzed these words and decided that Palon understood why and what his brother was hiding. What if he was hiding something from her himself? Anyway, night fell, the boys returned to the estate, and of course, as Palon had promised, he was carrying his bride in his arms. Finally, he told her that if she didn't get better, she should use holy water. The girl replied that using such a rare thing on a small wound was foolish. He looked around in surprise and assumed she was out. In that case, he said he'd bring her more, but she tried to dissuade him, saying she still had some. The girl immediately went to the chest of drawers and took out holy water from it to prove that it was still there. Nevertheless, he took this water and, kneeling down, said that he would do everything, but it would be better for her not to move. At that moment, he poured holy water on her leg and told her that if she had any more wounds, she should use the water immediately. He would bring her as much as she needed. He left soon after, and after Palon's departure, the atmosphere inside the house seemed surprisingly quiet. She also remembered that a letter from His Majesty should have arrived by now. In any case, she decided that if not now, then very soon she would read it. 2 days later, the letter with the Emperor's order arrived. Naturally, the person it was addressed to read it and was shocked. The Marquis de Orche burst into his daughter's room and asked her in bewilderment what she was trying to achieve by doing this. The man shouted and said that he didn't even know where in the world such a thing had been seen, that a daughter would take her father's place. Kyra looked at him coldly and asked if he'd finished. It was her right by her mother's side of the family, and she would have gotten her status sooner or later. Anyway, what was wrong then? He started laughing at her words, saying that now he understood what she was constantly thinking about, so she would push him away, even though she hadn't yet experienced life herself. The man immediately called the butler. As soon as he entered, he addressed the Marquis, addressing him as Mr. Travis. The head of the family, perplexed, asked if this piece of paper was really why they were now calling him Lord. He was Marquis Travis, and he had ordered them to obey his orders. He had ordered him to lock Kara in the room and not even give her water. Our heroine found it funny to watch this because now she is the main one in this house, and of course no one will listen to this crazy guy. According to her father, she realized he wanted a break from her, so she asked Fossil to lock him in his room so he could rest and think. Of course, all the butler could do was nod his head and obey the Marquis. The knights immediately grabbed the man who asked them in bewilderment what they were doing. What on earth was Kara doing? The girl smiled one last time and told her father that he had done everything he could, taking advantage of her privileges. She thanked him for warming up a place for her, and now he can rest, because she takes everything for herself. The man, perplexed, asked his daughter how she could do this to him. Soon the door slammed shut, and the former Marquis's screams echoed down the hallway. All the workers, including Kyra, watched the proceedings. In any case, the girl decided she needed to deal with the servants her father had hired. The girl immediately turned to the butler and asked him where the contracts that the workers signed with her father were. Soon afterward, Vuesel brought in the butler her father had hired. The young man fell to his knees and apologized to the Marquis for his reckless behavior. The girl decided not to listen to this for long, so she decided to ask about the keys. Where were the keys to the warehouse and the safe? He should have them. The butler, completely trembling, held out his hands, in which lay the keys. Vosel took them, and our heroine said that she needed the contracts that her father had drawn up with the new staff. After a while, the guy brought contracts. There were 21 people in total. He said they were decent people who did their jobs diligently. Kyra sighed heavily, but was still glad to hear that at least the workers were good, so she decided not to fire them. The butler's expression changed, and he thanked the Marquise. Soon the girl raised her head and asked the guy in surprise what his name was. He introduced himself as Depp. In this case, the girl turned to Depp and asked him as a decent servant to fulfill her request. Almost with tears in his eyes, because he still stayed, the guy said that he would fulfill the Marquise's requests. Our heroine said that her father would soon be leaving for his domain, so she wanted him to accompany him there. Depp was shocked, but Kyra handed over the documents and asked to send them and Depp to the estate. Her father had signed a contract, so he would be the one paying the salaries. The boy looked at the Marquise in horror and asked if he really couldn't earn her favor. Kyra said he could do it. The guy's expression changed again, and he asked her to tell him what to do, because he was ready for anything. The girl told me to report to her about my father once every 2 weeks, and of course in such a way that he wouldn't suspect anything. The guy stood up and proudly said that he could handle this task and would be only happy to help. In that case, Kyra smiled, saying that apparently her father had hired him for a reason. Trahan's territory, by the way, isn't that big, so there are plenty of workers. The only problem is that they weren't always paid on time. The girl couldn't care less how her father would survive there. The money he stole would last him the rest of his life. After a while, a puzzled Vienna ran into Kara's office, asking her sister what she was doing. The girl asked how she could lock her father in the room. Kara replied that she had no choice. Vienna still couldn't understand what it meant, so she asked what their father had done. Kyra asked her sister if she didn't know how he treated her. It was the only way out of her situation. However, Vienna insisted that it was wrong to treat her father like that. Our heroine, however, didn't sympathize with him in the least. In fact, she found it funny and wondered if she really was his daughter. At that moment, Vienna looked at her sister in surprise and asked why she was looking at her so strangely. Kyra told her that as she now knew she was the mistress of the house, the Marquise, Vienna, perplexed, asked if she was really threatening her. Our heroine laughed and said that these were not threats. It was just the simple truth. She glanced out the window, wondering what to do with Vienna. Perhaps she should be sent with her father. Either way, Kyra wondered what Vienna had even talked about with the Empress. What if Her Majesty had hinted at something? Meanwhile, the girl, perplexed, told her sister that she would soon become the wife of the second prince. So why would she need these rights? Kyra looked at her sister in surprise and asked if she'd heard that the emperor wanted to break off the engagement, although perhaps it wouldn't come to that. Vienna asked whether there would be a wedding or not. Our heroine told her that she herself didn't know. She didn't yet understand His Majesty's intentions. In conclusion, she said that this is precisely why she needs her legal rights. She couldn't just go with the flow. Maybe that's what Vienna wanted to do for her? I understand that she is not in a very advantageous position. Vienna began to turn her head and say that this is not so. Nevertheless, the girl said almost with tears in her eyes that she would now be afraid of what would happen to her father. Kyra smiled, telling her sister that she was very kind-hearted, but still in such matters, it was necessary to put that aside and analyze the situation sensibly. She asked her sister if she could imagine what would happen if her father spent all the money he had put aside for her future. The girl asked again, perplexed. Our heroine continued to say that she would marry most likely the fifth prince. Did she have any idea what kind of dowry she would need? Kyra, by the way, decided to ask her sister if she knew what it was. For the prince to agree to marry her, she'd have to buy a lot of expensive things. Family status and economic situation are crucial for marriage. Even if her relatives are having problems, she has one, which means there shouldn't be any problems with marriage. Vienna, looking at her sister, asked what she needed to do to receive the inheritance. Our heroine told her that she needed to go with her father to their estate for a while. She needed to stay there until the rumors died down and everything calmed down. In any case, she asked her sister not to worry, because after all, she would always be on her side. Vienna nodded, knowing that her older sister always tries her best for her. Our heroine asked her to think for herself. Why should she become a marquise and send her father to his domain? Of course, it was all for her own sake. The girl asked again, perplexed. Kara replied that her father was too greedy, although he had been kind to her as a child. In any case, she asked to see him now. He no longer needed his grown-up eldest daughter. At this point, Vienna lowered her head, saying that she could not take a position higher than her father's. Our heroine, perplexed, asked how she couldn't do it. What about marrying the fifth prince? Vienna said with disappointment that the emperor and empress only wanted the best brides for their children. And besides, Rakan loved her, so how would she cope? Kyra assured her sister that he needed time. The fifth prince had lived in Labelle before his confession and didn't even know that imperial blood flowed in his veins. Vienna asked her sister what she was talking about, to which the girl said that it was she who confirmed Rakan's belonging to the imperial family, and he was apparently very grateful to her. She also said that Rakan might be worried about her, but she is sure that it is definitely not love. The girl assured Vienna that she deserved to be with him. The girl looked down shyly and said she really hoped so. Our heroine was even surprised by how quickly Vienna fell for her sweet talk. How had she managed to deceive her for so long? It seems that she is still too young and does not do this, although all this may be just a common pretense. Is it possible that someone helped them in a past life? Although if so, that person was definitely the Empress. Empress Rechnelsia took this position after deceiving the Emperor's previous wife. Considering how many years she has maintained her position as Empress, despite having no children, one can only guess at her cunning and resourcefulness. Incidentally, she was choosing between the two sides, and ultimately sided with Rakan. What could she possibly say to Vienna? What does Her Majesty plan to do? She knew that, to find out, she needed to assign her sister to her. The girl told her sister that she would help her become the fifth prince's wife, and she should believe it. However, Kyra assured her sister that to achieve this, she would need to become closer to the Empress. This would help her in the future, as she was very influential. In any case, the conversation was over, so Kyra sighed and said she was going to rest. At that moment, Vienna stopped her sister. The girl decided to tell her sister what had happened at the tea party. She said with a guilty expression that the Empress had already told her something at the tea party. Of course, Kyra asked what she had said. Vienna replied that first, she would have to help her sister a lot when she married the prince. Our heroine soon asked what the second thing was. Vienna begged her sister not to misunderstand. Kyra began to calm her sister down and say that she could not misunderstand her sister, so she asked her to speak. The girl sheepishly told him to report it if she suddenly wanted to break off the engagement. She said she could help with that. Kyra immediately understood why Her Majesty had summoned Vienna. It was to obtain an annulment of the marriage contract. In any case, our heroine said that she didn't really need it, so she could go. As soon as her sister left the room, she became lost in thought. The girl recounted her conversation with the Empress. She understood that now, given her position, she would be treated with more respect. You could say it was a bonus of gaining official status. Our heroine immediately decided that all she had to do was figure out what the Empress was going to do and how she could bring Vienna and Rakan together. For some reason at that moment, she remembered Rakan's words telling her she couldn't kiss other people anymore. He said it with too much self-confidence. What does this beetle really think of her? Is it true that he's such a powerful wizard? At that moment, the butler entered the room, telling the lady that the research she had requested on the Trahan family had been completed. The girl asked him to forget about it for now and follow her. Leaving the room, Vozel asked in surprise where they were going. She replied that she needed to check something. Soon they came to the terrace where she met with Pelon. Looking out the window from the inside, she tried to figure out if there was anything she could see from there. However, she immediately remembered that it had been night, and the curtains were open. It was also cold, so the glass would hardly have been so transparent. And even looking around, she couldn't take into account the fact that Melvin was nearby, so he definitely wouldn't have missed anything suspicious. However, at that moment, she noticed some strange and glowing stone. The girl asked the butler to open the door, and a moment later, she was walking out onto the terrace. Approaching it, she made the logical conclusion that it was a magic crystal. But why was it here? Vossel approached the lady and said that most likely it was activated during Miss Vienna's coming-of-age celebration. Magicians did indeed use such crystals for lighting, but if desired, the stones can be used for other purposes as well. It was strange that, after the celebration, only one such stone remained. The butler said it was his mistake and said he would call the maid. Nevertheless, she asked him to stop, looking into the distance. She realized the distance from the terrace to the crystal-powered lamps was very large. He was probably there for a reason. The girl asked the butler if she could use the crystal again. The man replied that there was no magic in it now, so it was impossible. However, he said that, once charged, the crystal could only be used once. Kara wondered where it came from and where they'd purchased it. The man explained to the lady that to obtain this information, he would need to dig up the archives. Why did the lady need information about the magic crystal so badly? The girl started baring her teeth and saying that most likely there was a rat in their house. In any case, she knew that in 2 days, her father would go to Trahan. Everyone was already busy packing his things. At that very moment, someone knocked on Kara's door. It turned out to be Andreas, asking if he could come in. Kyra told him that if he was worried about his sister, he could go with them. Looking at her younger brother's upset face, Kara told him not to worry about her, because everything would be fine with her until he returned. After all, she told him that he would remember his childhood by returning to his native estate where he used to live with his sister. However, the guy said that he didn't want to go there at all, because he didn't have any pleasant memories associated with that place. In this case, our heroine only happily hugged him and said that he could stay here without any problems. The boy was glad to hear this, and then said that when his sister left, he wanted to show Kara something. Our heroine asked in surprise what he was talking about, but Andreas said he'd explain everything later. The girl nodded. And so finally, the day came when father and Vienna were ready to set off on their journey. Kyra smiled sweetly at her father and wished him a pleasant trip to the estate. The man screamed and told her she was a poisonous snake for smiling in such a situation. He promised to show her what happened for treating her father like that. Soon after, Vienna said goodbye to her sister, and they climbed into the carriage, which immediately began to move away from the Deorsch estate. That evening, our heroine lay in bed, with a calm soul, mentally saying goodbye to her father. She hoped to never cross paths with him again in this life. Suddenly, the girl seemed to vanish into thin air, and soon found herself in an unknown place, an endlessly green field and a breeze pleasantly refreshing her skin, a quiet lake, and a beautiful sky. When it was all over, Kyra wanted to live with the same peace in her heart. Looking around, she was surprised by how easy it was here. If this was a dream, she wished it would never end. But suddenly, as if out of nowhere, bad weather came. A heavy downpour began. The girl immediately realized something was wrong. She felt in her heart that she had to run. Soon she found herself in a different place. The sun was shining again. The weather was fine, but she didn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, she felt her face was completely dry. Why was she seeing herself again after the poisoning? At that moment, the water began to rise, but the girl said she didn't want to. She'd been through so much already. However, no one heard her plea. The water level rose so high that the girl began to drown. She couldn't even take a breath. She guessed it was just a dream, which meant she couldn't die in her sleep. She couldn't just leave like that. She still had so much to do. In the end, the girl tried to wave her arms. She was incredibly scared and asked anyone for help. Soon she began to drown, and the last thing on her mind was his name, Pelon, help. Suddenly, someone grabbed her hand. Meanwhile, a perplexed Pelon called Kaira and tried to wake her up. Our heroine did wake up at some point and noticed Pelon standing in front of her, but she soon fell asleep again. After some time, the girl jumped up in horror, not understanding where she was and what was happening. Looking around, she realized it was her room. Was it morning already? Someone was talking to her, asking if she was okay. Turning her head, the girl noticed a frightened Pelon in front of her and immediately asked him why he was there. The guy immediately apologized for scaring her. He thought she was feeling unwell, so he said he'd call a doctor. He immediately got out of bed and walked over to Jane. The boys started talking about something. At that moment, the girl noticed Pelon's jacket on the chair, and therefore she immediately realized that he had spent the whole night there next to her. Just then, Jane came up to her and said that His Highness had come to convey the Emperor's words, but he saw that Kara was ill, so he sat there all night. Jane said they were both worried that she wouldn't wake up or that she would get worse, but luckily, everything turned out okay. Sometime later, our heroine was sitting in the bathroom thinking about her dream. It was so strange. Why did she even dream about it? She suddenly realized that she shouldn't have sent Vienna and her father to the Trahan estate. Pelon also sat here all night, which meant that she would have to apologize for this and invite him for a cup of tea. They hadn't had a heart-to-heart talk for a long time. At that moment, a maid came up to her and said that the second prince had returned to the palace and asked her to convey this before he left. This was an official document specifying the date and location of the title-giving ceremony. Only members of the upper class are allowed to participate in such events. She was quite curious about what would happen at the title-giving ceremony. Suddenly, she noticed the butler talking to a man. Our heroine approached him and asked in bewilderment if this was really Ronald. The man bowed before her and said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He didn't even know how to express his gratitude that she remembered such a poor man. The girl couldn't believe it was really him. Ronald said it was true and soon apologized for failing to protect his former mistress. Ronald left the estate immediately after his mother's death, feeling guilty about what happened. In her past life, when Kara realized that her body was poisoned, she really wanted a good doctor like him to be by her side, but he left the estate and was never found. Nevertheless, the girl looked at Vatzel in surprise and asked what the doctor was doing there. Where had they met? The man interrupted their conversation and said that he had been living in the village all this time. Our heroine immediately became thoughtful because they were talking about the province to which Palon had traveled to deal with bandits. Ronald said that in this village, he had a small clinic for common people. His Highness approached him and began questioning him about his origins. It was then that he revealed that he had been the De Orsh family's doctor. As soon as he heard that Kyra was looking for him, he immediately came here. It seemed to him that the second prince cared deeply for her. Our heroine couldn't deny it either, and although their relationship began with a contract, the fact that he is on her side truly gives her strength. Regardless, the girl smiled and happily welcomed Ronald to the Orshi estate. She was truly glad he had returned home. Incidentally, she truly wanted to find a trusted healer, but since she hadn't been able to find one in her past life, she quickly abandoned the idea. Since he has now returned on his own, it can be said that death by poisoning is over. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, and the girl told them to come in. The maid said that while cleaning Mr. Travis's room, a safe had been found. The girl, of course, although she was surprised and did not know what safe they were talking about, said that she would come now. After some time, the girl stood in her father's room and asked in surprise if it was really a safe. The butler said that he clearly remembered that the previous marquis also used similar hiding places. Our heroine, realizing they were talking about her grandfather, wondered what was inside. One way or another, she assumed that it was unlikely to be so easy to open, otherwise her father would have done it long ago. The butler asked in surprise if the lady believed Mr. Travis had never discovered the safe's secrets. The lady replied that she assumed so. In that case, he too was curious about what they would have to do with him. After all, there was nothing else in this room. Our heroine told him to leave the safe for now, and she'd ask Viscount Austin. Who knows, maybe he has some information. After some time, she contacted him, and the man, upon seeing the safe, sighed deeply and said it wasn't that easy to open. It was the safe of the Kingdom of Reason. The girl immediately realized the pattern was exactly the same as with her mother's box. Nevertheless, she asked if it was possible to open it. The man said it depended on how exactly the previous marquise had closed it. Kara immediately assumed there was a chance it would never open at all. The Viscount said that he would try to find out in the Kingdom of Reason, and also most likely her grandfather left some notes, so they would try to find out together. Kyra then thanked the man for his help, and with a final smile said goodbye to him. Who knew that Viscount Austin would one day address her as a marchioness? Just think. At that moment, Andreas walked into the room. Our heroine, surprised, asked how his lessons were going. Were they finished? The guy thanked her and said everything was great. In that case, the girl was happy and said he could go and rest. Or did he have something to tell her? The boy looked down and said that he heard that his older sister was ill last night. The girl convinced her brother it was just a nightmare and she was fine. However, Andreas apologized for not coming, as he hadn't even known she was ill. The girl told him he should focus on his studies, so she would be proud of him. He shouldn't worry about her health. She could handle it, so he should believe in her. Andreas smiled and nodded his head, then reminded her that there was something he wanted to tell her before leaving Vienna. He asked our heroine if she wanted to see something that Vienna had. The girl, of course, did not understand what was being discussed, but her interest still got the better of her, so she agreed. Soon, Andreas brought her 2 envelopes and handed them to his sister. She opened them with surprise and began to read. Within a moment, she was squeezing them with incredible aggression because she couldn't even imagine their contents. Quote from the letter, "Dear Andy, your mother committed an irreparable sin, and I want to confess everything while we are still together." Her love, as it turned out, was not his father, but the Marquis de Orsh, who was also in love with her. That day, Travis learned she was marrying his older brother and came to visit her. They ended up spending the night together, trying to overcome their sadness. And so his father didn't know it, but Vienna was actually Travis de Orshi's daughter. The woman asked him to protect her weak little sister. Meanwhile, our heroine was in shock. This freak literally cheated on his mother and God. Now it was clear why he protected her so much. Our heroine immediately felt ill. Andy asked her if she was okay, but she couldn't understand why he'd let her read it. The girl sighed heavily and asked if there were more. The guy apologized for showing them, but he felt she should know the truth, and that was all he had. Kyra then asked Andreas to wait a bit, as she needed to get some fresh air. The girl couldn't understand how her father and Lady Trahan could do this, literally live all this time as if nothing had happened. That's why Andy stayed with her. The girl assumed he simply felt sorry for her. The girl told her brother she wasn't feeling well, so she suggested they talk tomorrow. The guy said he understood and apologized again. She realized at that moment that she simply wouldn't have known this if she hadn't lived a second life. Incidentally, this is hardly the only secret hidden under her nose. She was incredibly scared. She couldn't even imagine what to do. What if someone even found out about this? Even the next day, she could not understand why Lady Trajan told her son about this. The letter was written the year Vienna, and Andreas moved. That is the day before his brother first visited the estate. However, this is only the first letter. What's in the second? Quote again, Andy. I know you don't understand yet, but I had no choice. Travis dreamed of becoming a marquise more than anything, so he abandoned them. Before her death, she will have no feelings left inside except betrayal. If she had the chance to turn back time, she wouldn't want to be involved with any of the Trahan men. She especially didn't want to meet Travis, because if she hadn't met him, her fate would have been different. After all, he abandoned his own daughter for his own gain, just like he did her. Our heroine, judging by this letter, realized that she wanted the same revenge. She also felt similar feelings towards Rakan. At that moment, the girl asked Vassel to find out where Lady Trahan was. The man asked what had happened. Kyra said that she would need to meet with her, and she would try sending a letter first. 3 days later, a maid told the Marchioness that she had received a letter from Lady Trahan. She was currently at Lottie's Abbey. At this moment, Soren also decided to personally thank the mistress, albeit late for appointing her as the head maid. She promised to do everything to live up to her expectations, and hopes Kara was pleased to hear this and said she believed in her. Soon after, she approached Voxel and Soren and asked them to bring Andreas to her. The first thing she decided was that they needed to go to the convent Lady Trahan had written to her, where she lived, and suggested they come to her to discuss the matter. At that moment, Soren turned to the lady and asked her in surprise who would accompany her. Kyra replied that she'd just wanted to talk about that. She invited her to come with her. The girl was very surprised. However, our heroine knew she was practicing with a sword. They were going to a convent, so she couldn't take a man with her. In that case, the girl agreed. Unexpectedly, she asked, "What about Mr. Andreas? Is he allowed?" Our heroine smiled at her and said that he was still a minor, so he could. That's how they went to the Lottie's temple, together with Soren and Andreas. They arrived a short time later. Our heroine immediately said they had come to meet Delia's sister. The maids looked at the guests in surprise and asked what their relationship was with her. The girl said that she was her niece, and then pointing to Andreas, she said that he was her son. She also said they'd brought a few things for the monastery. Winter would be here soon, so they asked not to refuse. The woman was surprised to hear there was so much here. Anyway, she asked Kara for Ayani. The girl sheepishly said she had a small family. The maid immediately noticed the sign of the royal family and apologized, saying that she did not immediately recognize such important guests. Our heroine said there was no point in doing that, as they would get to Sister Delia on their own. The maid then said she would call her immediately. After some time, Sister Delia stood at the entrance to the monastery, thanking the guests for their visit. Kyra apologized for disturbing her, but they needed to discuss something related to Andreas. At that moment, Delia took Andy by the hand and said that she had a gift for the Marquise in the room, so she asked him to bring it. The guy, surprised, said he didn't know where it was. The woman told him it was in the left drawer of the desk. Then she asked him to bring it again. Kyra glanced at her brother and said they would wait for him together. Only then, with a sigh, did he go into his mother's room. At that moment, Delia bowed again and thanked the Marquise for their visit. However, our heroine insisted that, on the contrary, it was she who had requested the meeting. The woman said she understood, and then added that if she promised one thing, she would tell him everything she wanted. Already sitting in the room, our heroine looked at Lady Trahan and asked her what her request would be. She began to cry and beg for Andy's protection. Kara, perplexed, said that her brother was very dear to her, and therefore his safety was her priority. Sister Delia thanked the Marquise and assumed that she had a lot of questions. Suddenly, she looked at Kyra and asked if she knew who ordered her to send Vienna to the Orshi estate. Our heroine asked in surprise if this really wasn't her personal decision. The woman said she didn't want to, but the fifth prince ordered her to. Kyra asked if that was true. Delia said she had proof, so she asked Andy to bring it. This gift was a letter in which the fifth prince asked to send Vienna to the Orshi estate. So Rakan did it, so his sister would come to the Orshi estate. Incidentally, all of Kyra's problems began with Vienna's arrival. It was then that she began to wonder why she was not as loved as Vienna. While courting her sister, the girl thought that if she became closer to her, she would also be noticed. Kyra asked her sister how she wanted to braid her hair today. She knew she'd be recognized then. But nevertheless, no matter how hard she tried, nothing changed, and she only got worse. And at that very moment, Rakan appeared in her life, the only one who saw her differently. He assured her that he was always on her side. She literally had no one but him, so to see his smile to gain his recognition, she did everything to be appreciated. She did everything he said to become his emperor, but soon an unpleasant situation occurred. At some point, when she realized that she had become too addicted to poison, it was already too late. An entire year of her life was lost, and she was taking pain pills instead of food. She wanted at least before her death to see her beloved in the imperial crown. She wanted to hear what he needed. She was 10 when her mother died. It was too difficult an age to cope with such a loss. And because of the obligations that fell upon her, she fled to the Labelle estate south of Verbentora. It was there that she met Rakan, and thanks to his care, the sadness over her mother's death began to subside. She knew for sure that if it weren't for him, she wouldn't have been able to hold out for so long. And even after being reborn, nothing changed. It's true that she was able to cope with her grief only thanks to him, but sometimes all these childhood memories gave her strength in difficult situations. But now, those strengths seemed to have evaporated. The girl's hands were shaking uncontrollably. It turned out that, from start to finish, he had been dishonest with her. At this point, Delia apologized to the Marquise, saying she didn't know what to say. She realized she was very surprised, and most likely angry with hers. Our heroine, meanwhile, held back her tears, but gathering air in her lungs, she told Lady Trahan that she was truly angry. The woman apologized again for how things turned out. She truly felt sorry. Still, Kyra couldn't understand why she told her son everything. He was probably just as shocked by the information she'd received. The woman said they were not destined to know the date of their death, and of course, she was terrified to reveal the truth about Vienna's father. She thought she'd go crazy. However, she hit the table hard and said that she hated all the men from the Trahan family. She needed revenge. Looking at her reflection in the cup, our heroine said that she understood her feelings in this regard because they were similar to hers. At this point, Delia said that when her father left for the capital, he stopped communicating with her. Kyra can't even imagine how pathetic Delia was trying to hide her pregnant belly and getting her husband drunk so she could later say they slept together. However, after Vienna was born, her fiancé admitted that Travis advised him to marry her. Despite everything that had happened between them, he married her off to her brother so that he wouldn't interfere with his rise to Marquis. He did it all for himself. She really tried to let him go and move on, but Vienna was becoming more and more like her father. She was ready to do anything for her own benefit, even to step over her and her brother. Delia said she simply couldn't allow this to happen, so she asked the Marquise for help. She would provide all the necessary evidence. After some time, Andreas came into the room and brought a box with a letter. Our heroine began to read the letter and almost immediately realized that it was Rakan's handwriting. The girl didn't know how to react. Sighing heavily, she said it really was him. In that case, she decided it would be best to leave and think things over. After a while, Kyra was practically asking, tears in her eyes, what to do. In this world, you literally can't trust anyone. The girl asked Soren to stay with her a little longer, and she asked Andy to go and rest. The guy, as if feeling guilty, turned around and said that he would go to his room. The girl then went to her office. Upon entering, she noticed a stack of documents and almost immediately remembered that the study was likely finished. Count Ingson was the seller of the magic stones. They were used for lighting and were used less than 3 times. According to the conclusion, the stones were completely ordinary. Then our heroine thought about it and decided that the problem wasn't in the stones after all. The action jumps forward 10 days. It's Kyra's inauguration day. The girl, already walking along the path, was shocked by how many people came to see it. She also even spotted Count Ingson, whom she hadn't expected to meet there. After all, he was supposed to be busy with county affairs. However, at that moment, the emperor called our heroine to him, addressing her by name. Looking at her, he asked if she promised to be loyal to the imperial family and to care for her people and the citizens of their country. The girl bowed her head before His Majesty and said that she swears to do her duty. In that case, he Alex Farahun Legret makes her a promise. From now on, she will act as the mistress of her family. All the people in the area began to congratulate the Marquise, saying that they were glad that she had regained her rights. Suddenly, someone grabbed Kara's hand and said that he was also happy, and that's why he asked to convey congratulations.